Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I came to this house because I wanted peace. I didn't care about its age or the fact that it stood alone at the top of a barren hill. I just wanted a place where no one would bother me. I was working on a research book about strange phenomena, and I figured this location would help me focus. It was far from any city, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. I liked that. It seemed like a simple plan. Move in, do my work, and enjoy the quiet. That was before I realized the house had its own agenda. I arrived during the late afternoon. The sky was dim, and the wind whipped around me the moment I opened my car door. The driveway was just a patch of rough dirt leading up to the front entrance. The house looked bigger than I expected. Its paint was peeling in several spots, and some of the windows seemed patched up with boards. I saw cracks in the foundation and a slanted porch railing. I felt uneasy, but I brushed it off. I told myself it was just an old place in need of repairs. I walked to the door and fiddled with the key. The lock creaked when I turned it, but it opened on the first try. Inside, the floors were wooden and uneven. Dust floated around in the weak light coming through the windows. The air smelled stale, like the place had been shut for a long time. There were a couple of rooms near the entryway. One looked like a living room, and the other was a cramped dining room with a small chandelier. I dropped my bags near a stairwell that led to the second floor. My plan was to explore and figure out how I'd set up my workspace. I had a laptop, some notes, and boxes of research materials. I also had a few personal items, but nothing fancy. The first odd thing happened that evening. I was unpacking in the living room. The power was on, but the lights flickered every now and then. I assumed it was old wiring. As I was organizing some books on a makeshift shelf, I heard a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind outside. Then I realized it was coming from the wall behind me. It didn't sound threatening. It was more like a breathy murmur that made the hair on my arm stand up. I listened for a few seconds, but I couldn't understand any words. I decided to ignore it. I was tired and didn't want to freak myself out on the first night. I set up a small desk in one of the upstairs rooms. The second floor had a long hallway with several doors. Most of them led to empty bedrooms. One of them had a broken bed frame and a few old chairs stacked in a corner. Another was completely bare except for a stained rug in the center. The room I picked was at the end of the hall. It had a large window facing the hill's slope. I liked the view, even though it was mostly dry grass and rocks. The desk fit under the window and I placed my laptop there. I planned to start writing the next day. That night I tried to sleep, but the whispers returned. This time they seemed to move from wall to wall. I heard them in the ceiling for a moment, then near the door. Occasionally I caught a word or two, but it was always too faint to be sure. I felt a chill in my chest, like my heart was pumping cold blood. My hands got clammy, and I pulled the blanket up to my neck. I kept looking around the dark room, waiting for something to pop out. Nothing did. I only saw the faint shape of the furniture whenever lightning flickered outside. It was raining lightly, and each flash of lightning lit the room for a split second. At some point, I fell asleep from exhaustion. The next morning, I woke up feeling shaky. I made some coffee in the old kitchen, though the appliances were in bad shape. The stove barely worked, and the fridge rattled when I opened it. I sipped my coffee near the window, watching the drizzle outside. I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling from the night before. I told myself it was just nerves, and my imagination playing tricks on me. After I finished breakfast, I decided to look around the house more thoroughly. I opened closets and peered into dusty corners. I wanted to see the condition of the place, figure out if I'd need repairs, and maybe find some hidden storage spaces that old houses sometimes have. That's when I found the first hidden corridor. In a room on the first floor behind a large cabinet, there was a slight gap in the wall. The cabinet was too heavy for me to move alone, so I nudged it a bit to see if it was stuck to the wall. It shifted more easily than I expected, revealing a narrow opening about 2 feet wide and maybe 6 feet high. It led into darkness. The air seeping from inside smelled damp and stale. I shone a flashlight into it and saw a hallway that extended to the left and right. The walls inside were made of rough stone, with some faded symbols painted near the entrance. I stepped in. The floor was cold concrete, and my footsteps echoed. I walked for a few yards, turning left. I saw more symbols on the walls. Some looked like circles with lines crossing them. Others were just scratches or markings that seemed random. I felt an odd pressure in my ears, like when you drive up a mountain and your ears pop. The air felt heavy. Then I heard that whisper again, this time right behind me. I spun around, pointing the flashlight back the way I came, but saw nothing. I tried to ignore the goosebumps on my arms and kept walking. After a few more steps, the corridor split into 2 paths. One turned sharply to the right, the other slanted downwards. I picked the downward path, thinking it might lead to some old cellar. As I moved along, the whispering grew louder, but still indistinct. My heart was pounding. My breaths became short. I stopped for a moment to calm down, leaning against the wall. The stone was rough and slightly wet. I felt a drop of water land on my shoulder, probably from a crack above. I looked up, but only saw more darkness. It felt like something was standing there, watching me, but I couldn't see a shape. My hands were shaking and my stomach felt tight. I told myself I was just anxious. I decided to turn around and head back to the entrance. I wasn't ready to explore that much on my first real day there. As I retraced my steps, I had the sense that someone was following me, matching my pace. I heard faint footsteps that stopped when I stopped. My skin felt like it was crawling. My heartbeat thumped in my ears. I hurried the last few yards and practically leaped out of the opening back into the room. I slid the cabinet back in place, wiped my forehead, and took a deep breath. I stood there for a minute, letting my heartbeat slow down. Later, I checked the house's blueprint that I found in a drawer in the dining room. It didn't show any corridors or extra rooms. I realized the place was much more complicated than I first thought. I felt a strange pull to go back in there, even though it scared me. I couldn't explain it, but I felt the house wanted me to find something. The thought of it made my skin crawl, but it also made me curious. Over the next few days, I stuck to my writing during the daytime. I tried to focus on my research about supernatural events. My notes covered stories of old rituals and haunted places. I felt ironic typing up reports about paranormal sightings while I was hearing whispers in my own walls. Sometimes the lights flickered so frequently that I had to turn them off and use a flashlight or candle. I called an electrician, but the phone connection was weak and I only got his voicemail. I left a message, but he never called back. I tried to ignore the bad wiring and kept writing. At night, I kept hearing voices. They seemed to come from behind my walls, sometimes from the ceiling. They never said anything clear, but I sensed they were talking about me. Occasionally, I caught what sounded like my name. I would freeze, my heart hammering in my chest, my palms sweating. Sometimes I'd break into a cold sweat if the whispering got too close. I'd hear it next to my ear, so close that I'd jerk my head around, expecting to see a face behind me. But there was never anyone there. After a week, I decided I needed to explore those hidden corridors again. I found another entrance behind a loose panel in the upstairs hallway. This one led to a narrow stairway that descended between the walls. I moved carefully, using the flashlight and trying not to brush against the cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. The steps were creaky, but they held my weight. The corridor at the bottom was cramped. I could almost touch both walls with my elbows. The floor was slightly damp. I noticed more symbols, these etched into the stone rather than painted. They looked like they were done with some sharp tool. I came across a small room with a low ceiling. There was an old table in the center, and on it, I found a few pages of faded paper covered in symbols like the ones on the walls. The edges of the paper were torn, and some parts were illegible. I could see diagrams that looked like instructions for rituals, but I couldn't decipher the text. It was some language I didn't recognize. My flashlight flickered, and the shadow of the table seemed to shift like someone was standing behind it. I felt my throat tighten. My heart pounded so hard that I could hear it echo in my ears. I stepped back from the table and my foot slipped on something slick. I nearly fell, but I caught myself on the doorway. I felt the presence again, right behind me, breathing softly against my ear. A chill ran down my spine, and my muscles tensed. I spun around and aimed my flashlight at empty space. I couldn't handle the pressure. My scalp tingled, and I just bolted out of that room. I made my way back up the narrow stairs, back to the hallway. I closed the panel and pressed my hand against my chest. My heart felt like it would burst through my ribs. I stood there, panting, my forehead damp with sweat. I realized the house wasn't just a place to live. It wanted me to find those things. It wanted me to stay in those corridors and keep exploring. It wanted me to see the symbols and the inscriptions. Over the following nights, the whispering changed. It wasn't just random noises anymore. It sounded sad and urgent. I'd be half asleep, and I'd hear soft voices in the walls. They had a pleading tone, like they were asking for help. It unsettled me because it didn't feel hostile, but it felt desperate. I kept seeing flickers of movement out of the corner of my eye. I'd be walking through the living room and I'd sense something move past the doorway. Or I'd be in the kitchen and I'd see a shadow slide along the floor. Each time my chest tightened and I'd stop breathing for a second, expecting something to jump out. But nothing ever did. I tried to focus on my research, but my concentration was gone. The house consumed all my attention. I felt drawn to the hidden corridors, even though they filled me with panic. Every day I discovered new openings. One was in the dining room behind a loose board near the floor. Another was in a bedroom closet, hidden behind old sheets. They all connected to a network of passageways. Some led to cramped rooms with leftover junk. Others turned into dead ends. Others had ladders going up or down to different levels. It was like a labyrinth built inside the house. There were scribbles on the walls, some half erased, others bold and fresh. I couldn't read any of it, but it gave me the creeps. At some point, I realized I was spending more time in those corridors than in the actual rooms of the house. I would wander there with my flashlight, sometimes for hours, just listening to the low whispers. My nerves were shot, but I felt a pull, like I was searching for something important. My appetite got worse. I lost track of how many days I'd been there. My sleep schedule changed, and I slept more during the day, exploring the corridors at night when the voices grew louder. One evening, the house's electricity went out completely. I lit candles and walked around, checking the circuit breakers in the basement. Nothing fixed it. I gave up and sat in the living room with a candle by my side. I listened to the voices in the walls. They seemed to say my name again, over and over, but softly. It was like they were asking me to come join them. My hands trembled and my stomach felt hollow. I breathed slowly to calm myself. My mind kept telling me to leave, to pack up and drive away. But I also felt that I had to stay. I don't think the house wants a victim. It wants a partner. It wants someone who knows about these tunnels and who understands the symbols. That's why it hasn't driven me out. It's more like it's coaxing me, slowly, showing me pieces of a puzzle. Every time I discover a new corridor, I feel the heavy presence at my back guiding me. Sometimes I feel a soft touch on my shoulder, like a cold breeze passing over me. Each time it happens, I break into goosebumps. My throat goes dry, my pulse races, but I keep going deeper. Now every room I walk into has its own whisper, like the walls are alive. I hear faint moans, gentle sighs, quiet calls that fade if I stand still. When I write in my notebook, the pens sometimes roll off the table on their own. The windows rattle even when there's no wind. The door hinges squeak, opening or closing slightly without me touching them. I can't ignore it anymore. This house wants me to stay. It wants me to keep searching. I'm not sure what the end goal is. I just know that I can't bring myself to leave. My research feels insignificant compared to what's happening inside these walls. The house has secrets it wants me to uncover, but it also wants my silence. I feel like if I try to tell anyone, the whispers will turn angry. I sense that it's testing me, waiting to see if I'll share any of what I've learned. So far, I haven't told a soul. I just pace the corridors, listening to the whispers, finding new passages. I collect bits of old papers and try to make sense of them. I have a strong feeling that once I piece it all together, I'll understand why the house chose me. Right now, I'm in one of those hidden rooms. It's cramped and dark. I have a flashlight and a few candles. I'm writing down everything I can. The walls have fresh scratches, like someone was here recently. I can hear quiet murmurs on the other side of the wall. My stomach is in knots and my breath is shallow. My hands are shaking. Still, I'm not leaving. I feel this pull, like I'm part of the house now. It's showing me things I never thought possible. Maybe it's dangerous, but I'm too deep into it to turn back. The house doesn't want just a resident. It wants me to be an accomplice to its secrets. So I'm staying. I'm going to keep exploring until I have no more corridors left to search. I won't bring anyone else here. I won't talk about it beyond my own notes. The house can sense my compliance. The whispers seem calmer now, almost grateful. My heart is racing, but I'm not running away. I don't feel free, and I don't feel safe, but I can't walk out. Every inch of me is on edge, yet I keep going. Something about this house has taken hold of me. I hear the whispers even when I close my eyes, and I feel a strange sense that, somehow, this is where I'm supposed to be. I felt something was wrong the first night I slept there. I couldn't pinpoint why, but there was this odd pressure in my chest as soon as I turned off the lights. It wasn't the usual anxiety from moving to a new place. I've changed apartments before and never felt that kind of tension. This was different and it dug under my skin. That's how everything started. I'd found this apartment after 2 weeks of intense searching. I worked downtown and got tired of long commutes. A friend told me about a place that was small but had a decent price. When I checked it out, it looked fine on the surface. It was on the 4th floor of an older building near my office. The landlord showed me around and acted casual about the water stains on the ceiling. He said it was just old plumbing. The walls were a bit dingy in certain spots, but the place was furnished, and the rent was cheap. The timing was perfect, so I signed the papers and moved in a week later. On my first afternoon there, I set up my clothes in the tiny closet. The closet door was crooked, like it had been taken off the hinges and never put back on right. The living area was cramped, with a small sofa that smelled like stale laundry. The wooden floors creaked in certain spots, especially near the kitchenette. I noticed some cracks in the walls, but I didn't think much of it. Lots of old buildings have cracks. I just shrugged it off. I figured the place needed a bit of care. That night I sat on the couch eating a microwave dinner while flipping through the channels on the small TV. I heard muffled footsteps in the corridor. It sounded like boots on the hallway floor. They were slow and deliberate. I assumed someone was walking by, maybe coming home late, but the steps didn't fade away. They stopped in front of my door, or very close to it. I put my meal aside and got up. I opened my door, thinking maybe a neighbor needed something. The hallway was empty. The other doors on my floor were closed. Lights were on, but I couldn't see anyone around. I waited for a few seconds, then stepped outside and looked both ways. Still no sign of anyone. I told myself it was probably someone from downstairs or an echo from the floor above. The building was old. Sound can travel in weird ways. The second night, the same thing happened. Footsteps, close by, then silence. I checked again. No one. I knocked on the door of the unit next to mine, but got no answer. The unit across the hall belonged to an older couple, so I tried them. The man opened the door a crack, peered out, then opened it fully when he recognized I was new. I asked if he'd heard footsteps. He said no. I mentioned the unit next to mine, and he shook his head. He told me nobody lived there. He said it had been empty for months. It stayed vacant because the rent was too high for what the place offered. I said thanks and went back to my apartment. I was already uneasy, but I kept calm. I went through my nightly routine. I brushed my teeth, changed into sweats, got into bed, and tried to block everything out. I told myself I was just a little paranoid and needed time to settle in. On the third night, the footsteps came again, only this time they sounded heavier, like they were right outside my door. I sat up in bed. My heart pounded. I felt a trickle of sweat on my forehead. I listened carefully, not daring to move. The steps stopped. Then I heard a faint scraping sound along the wall behind my headboard. It was a slight scratch, like nails running across drywall. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to get out of bed and check the wall. It felt normal. No vibrations, no weird texture, just an old painted surface. The next morning, I decided to inspect the place more thoroughly in daylight. I moved some of the furniture away from the walls, especially the area where I'd heard the scratching. That's when I noticed the small cracks near the ceiling. They had a weird shape. They reminded me of footprints, but I couldn't make sense of that. They weren't big, just a few inches long, almost like someone had pressed a foot against the wall from the other side, creating an outline. The cracks branched out, giving them a faint shape. I put my hand on the plaster and it felt solid, but there was a slight roughness around those outlines. I felt a chill run down my arms. I tried to breathe normally and told myself it could be just random cracks and weird patterns. After work, I got home and checked the ceiling again. The damp spots were still there, a bit more discolored than before. The cracks looked the same. I took a shower, had a light dinner, and tried to keep my mind off that odd feeling. Around 11 p.m., and I turned off the TV and sat in the dark, listening. My heart thumped in my chest. My eyes darted around the room, expecting any sound, any movement. Then I heard those footsteps in the hallway again, except this time they stopped further away. After a few seconds, I heard a soft scraping noise in the corner of the living room, near the baseboard. It sounded like something pushing or rubbing against the wall. My chest got tight, and I tiptoed toward the sound. I pressed my ear to the wall, but it stopped. When I backed away, I thought I saw a slight movement in one of the cracks. It was almost imperceptible, like a twitch. The next day, I ran into the neighbor across the hall. I asked if she'd heard anything strange at night. She looked at me with sympathy and said no, not really. Maybe some building creaks because of the pipes. She said I might be hearing the elevator cables or something along those lines. I thanked her and went to work. All day I was distracted, checking my phone during breaks, looking up old building issues, water damage, or explanations for unusual sounds. I read about rodents in walls, but that didn't quite match what I was experiencing. When I got home, I decided to knock on the door of the vacant apartment next to mine. I did it partly to prove to myself that it really was empty. The door made a hollow sound with each knock. No answer. I tried the handle, but it was locked. I pressed my ear to the door, waited, and heard nothing. I felt silly, like I was chasing ghosts. I gave up and went inside my place. That night, the sounds got louder. The footsteps returned, then the scratching in the walls, followed by soft tapping noises. It wasn't random tapping. It felt controlled, like a coded sequence. I jumped at every tap. My pulse raced so much I thought I'd pass out. I kept turning on lights, pacing from one room to another. At around 2 a.m., I spotted fresh cracks near the kitchenette. These were shaped differently, kind of like elongated footprints, and they seemed to trail down toward the floor. I crouched down and ran my finger along them. Pieces of plaster crumbled off when I touched them. My skin broke out in goosebumps. I hardly slept that night. My body ached from tension. My eyes burned from exhaustion, and every small creak of the building made me jerk upright in bed. At dawn, I got dressed and left for work earlier than usual just to clear my head. I stopped by a coffee shop, tried to distract myself, but my stomach was too tight to finish my coffee. Over the next few days, I developed a routine of inspecting the cracks every morning and evening. I found more shapes, more outlines that looked eerily like footprints or handprints pressed from the other side. Some were near the ceiling, others closer to the floor. They were never larger than a standard adult foot, but their arrangement was bizarre. They followed no logical pattern. One night, I found a set of them trailing across the wall that separated my bedroom from the empty apartment next door. Another set was near the bathroom door. Each time I tried to convince myself it was just the building settling or some weird effect of humidity on the plaster. But then the movement started. Around midnight, I'd hear a faint shifting sound, like something sliding through the walls. I'd get up, turn on the lights, and stare at the cracks. In the dim glow, I'd swear I saw them expand or contract, like the shapes were alive. My arms would shake, and I'd feel this rush of adrenaline. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that my tired mind was playing tricks. But each morning, I found fresh flakes of paint on the floor, like the cracks had grown overnight. One evening, I was so freaked out that I decided to talk to the landlord. I called him and asked if there was any history of structural problems. He brushed me off, said all old buildings have minor cracks. I tried to explain they looked like footprints, but he cut me short and said it was probably just the shape of the chipped plaster. I asked if someone ever lived next door recently, and he claimed it had been empty for a while. He sounded impatient, like he didn't want to keep discussing it. I got frustrated and hung up, feeling dismissed. That same night, I heard a new sound around 3 a.m. It was a series of gentle knocks, almost rhythmic. They came from the wall between my bedroom and the vacant unit. The knocking would pause, then repeat. I tried to calm my breathing and focus. My thoughts ran wild. I wondered if a squatter had somehow gotten into the neighboring unit. But I remembered the locked door and how the neighbor across the hall insisted nobody lived there. After a few minutes, the knocking stopped. I felt sweat trickling down my back. I grabbed a flashlight, walked into the hallway, and stared at the wall. I aimed the flashlight beam at the cracks. The footprints seemed to shimmer in the light, not literally glowing, but the shadows they cast made them look raised. I reached out, touched one outline, and felt it vibrate under my palm like a faint tremor. I jerked my hand away. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I just stood there, breathing fast, trying to decide if I should leave the apartment immediately. But I didn't leave. I told myself it was late and I didn't have anywhere else to go right then. So I went back to bed and lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, body rigid with fear. I could hear every small sound, every distant thump. At times, I caught a faint scratching or a muffled shuffle. I wondered what would happen if I poked a hole in the wall, or if I tried to talk to whatever was inside. The idea made my skin crawl. Days passed. My routine became a cycle of sleepless nights, frantic mornings, and long hours at work where I struggled to concentrate. My coworkers noticed I was jumpy. I made up excuses about not sleeping well. They asked if I was sick. I just shook my head and changed the subject. One Saturday, I decided to stay up all night and watch the walls. I turned off all the lights and lit a single lamp in the living room. I sat in a chair facing the wall where I'd seen the cracks move the most. I had a flashlight ready, along with my phone camera. I was determined to catch something, some proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Around midnight, the familiar footsteps echoed in the corridor. They paused by my door, then moved on. I heard the shuffle of something inside the wall. My body tensed and I gripped the flashlight so hard my knuckles turned white. For a while I heard only the hum of my fridge and the distant sound of cars passing outside. Then came the gentle taps, 3 or 4 at a time, always from the wall. I held my breath and pointed the flashlight. The cracks looked like they were shifting. I blinked hard, unsure if it was my imagination. But then I saw the plaster flake off in a small spot near the largest footprint. It fell to the floor in a tiny puff of dust. I got up slowly and moved closer. The outline of that footprint pulsed outward, pushing the wall forward maybe half an inch, then retracting. It was like something was pressing from inside. I felt a wave of dizziness. My mind raced with panic, but I stayed there, watching. The tapping continued in small bursts, like some code. Each knock vibrated through the plaster. I was too scared to touch it this time. I just stood there, heart pounding, sweat dripping down my temples. After a few minutes, it stopped. The footprint sank back into place, and the cracks went still. I backed away, not blinking, afraid any quick movement would trigger it again. I managed to grab my phone and switch to the camera, but by the time I aimed it, everything was normal. The cracks looked harmless, just random lines in old paint. The next morning I considered moving out. My chest felt like it had a constant knot in it. My appetite was gone. I kept replaying that moment in my mind, the way the wall pushed out, as if a foot or a hand was trying to poke through. I walked around the apartment looking for more clues. I found more flakes of paint on the floor by the windows, near the corners, and by the bathroom door. Small cracks were everywhere now, not just in one spot. They formed patterns that resembled footsteps, sometimes overlapping, sometimes scattered. I ended up calling a friend, the same one who told me about the apartment. I asked if he could come over and check something out. He sounded busy, said he might come by next week. I didn't press him for details because I wasn't sure how to explain any of this without sounding unhinged. I just told him it was urgent. He promised to make time soon. In the following nights, the presence in the walls became more active. Soft scratches, occasional taps, and those echoing steps in the corridor outside. I noticed that the entity, or whatever it was, didn't seem to threaten me directly. It never tried to harm me or break through the wall in a violent way. It felt more like it was watching, waiting. I'd sense it when I was half asleep, that feeling of eyes on me, though I couldn't see anything. My body would go rigid, and I'd hear that faint knock or scratch, as if to remind me it was still there. I started sleeping with the lights on in the living room, leaving my bedroom door open so I could see down the hall. That gave me a small measure of comfort. I placed my phone next to me in bed, ready to call someone if the knocking got too intense. But each night ended the same way. Me lying awake for hours, heart pounding until exhaustion took over and I passed out for a few hours at dawn. One night, I caught myself talking out loud to the walls. I whispered that I wasn't a threat, that I just wanted peace. I felt silly, but it calmed me for a moment. I guess I was trying to keep whatever was there from getting more aggressive. Nothing answered me, just silence. Then a single gentle knock on the wall next to my bed. My breath caught in my throat. I stayed still, not saying another word. The knock didn't repeat. I keep telling myself I should leave, but I'm not sure if running away will solve anything. Part of me wants to know what it is, why it's here, and what it wants. Another part of me is terrified of the idea that it might follow me. These last few days I haven't heard as many footsteps in the hallway, but the cracks have multiplied. Sometimes I see them twitch, sometimes I see flakes fall. The entity hasn't tried to come through fully, yet I feel its presence more strongly every night. I'm on edge 24/7 now. My phone is in my hand all the time, ready to dial for help if things escalate. But I haven't dialed yet. I'm not sure how to explain this to anyone else. There's something in my walls that leaves footprints in the plaster. They'd think I was out of my mind or on something. I still can't believe it myself, and I'm living in the middle of it. Now, as I'm telling this story, I'm sitting on my couch, staring at the walls. The lights are on, and it's past midnight. My heart is pounding, and the skin on my neck is prickling. I can hear soft taps again, but they're faint. It's letting me know it's there, that it's watching. I have no idea how this will end. I just know that I'm not alone in here. Something else is inside the walls, and it's waiting. That's where I'm at right now. Living with an entity that doesn't speak but makes itself known in scratches and knocks, just beyond my reach, hidden on the other side of this old plaster. And every night I wait, tense and sweating, for it to reveal itself. I still remember the first night it happened. I was lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind wandering around every possible worry. My eyes felt dry, and the house was silent except for a faint breeze outside. Then I heard a voice. It was a low whisper at first, like a deep murmur that came from somewhere near the back of my property. I sat up, felt a chill on my arms, and realized it was coming from the direction of the old well. I live on a small rural property that I inherited from my uncle years ago. The land has a few acres of pasture, some trees, and a barn that leans a bit on one side. There's also an ancient well not far from the main house. It's sealed with a thick stone cover, and there are faded markings on it. I don't know who made them or how old they are. They're almost rubbed away by time. I always assumed it was just an old piece of farm history. I never thought much about it. I never tried to open it because it looked heavy and unstable. If the stone cover fell or broke, it would be a mess. That night, I grabbed my flashlight from the nightstand. My heart was pounding. I felt confused because I wasn't sure if I was dreaming or if the voice was real. The whisper repeated a phrase, but I couldn't make sense of the words. They seemed broken, like a foreign language or some old dialect. I forced myself out of bed, slipped on my boots, and headed out the back door. I didn't turn on the porch light. I just used the flashlight and walked slowly across the yard. The air felt colder than usual. The wind prickled my skin. I heard the rustling of leaves near the fence. My dogs were inside the barn and they were quiet. They usually bark at the slightest noise, but they stayed silent, and that felt strange. I moved the flashlight in a wide arc in front of me, checking for anything moving. The voice came again, louder this time. It sounded deep, like it came from a large space underground. I reached the well and noticed the stone lid was shifted to one side. It wasn't open, but it was out of place by an inch or two. The gap was enough for me to see a thin blackness inside. I felt a cold draft coming through that gap. I aimed the flashlight at the crack, but I couldn't see anything except darkness. The voice stopped as soon as my light hit the well. I felt uneasy. My pulse was racing. My hands were trembling a bit. I tried to push the stone back into place, but it wouldn't budge. It was heavier than I expected. The old symbols on the lid looked more defined than usual, like the outlines were a bit clearer. I remembered seeing them all worn out, but under my flashlight that night they seemed sharper. My heart was pounding so hard it made my head throb. I decided to leave it alone for the moment. I went back inside, locked the door, and checked the windows. I hardly slept. In the morning, the sunlight made everything seem normal. I went back out to the well in daylight. The cover looked the same as always, big, round, and covered in scratches and scuffs. The gap was there, but it was small. I pressed on the lid again, but it stayed in place. I figured maybe it had settled differently in the ground. I'm not an expert on old wells, so I didn't really know. I told myself it was probably just the wind making strange noises through that crack. But I couldn't forget the voice. It didn't sound like the wind. It sounded like words. That evening, I found it hard to concentrate on anything. I tried watching TV, but my thoughts kept drifting to the well. I felt a tightness in my chest, like I was waiting for night to fall. Around midnight, I heard it again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my flashlight and went straight out to the well. I moved quickly, my boots crunching the gravel, my breath visible in the cold air. The voice was clearer now. It kept repeating the same phrase, but I still didn't understand the language. I leaned closer to the crack in the stone. There was a damp smell like wet rock and earth. I whispered, "Hello?" I don't know why I did that. I felt a rush of fear and regret as soon as I spoke. The voice paused. Then it said something in a rumbling tone. One of the words sounded like a name. It wasn't my name, but the sound stirred something in me like I'd heard it before. I couldn't remember where or when. I ran my hand along the edge of the lid. It felt cold and rough. I tried to push it again and it barely moved. I felt a faint vibration under my palms, like something was shifting in the ground. My gut twisted. I pulled my hands away and stepped back. The whisper started again, and I could feel it inside my head. It was so low that my chest vibrated. I backed away slowly and returned to the house. My hand shook on the doorknob. In bed, I couldn't sleep. My mind was stuck on that name. I didn't fully grasp it, but it felt tied to me. I got up multiple times during the night to check the window. The yard looked empty. At dawn, I made myself some coffee and decided to call a friend of mine, Carl. He's a handyman who's dealt with old structures. I asked him about wells, about stone lids, if they can shift when the ground settles. He said yes, it's common. He offered to come by and help reseal it. We scheduled a day later that week, but he couldn't come right away because he had another job. I told him it was fine. I tried not to show how anxious I was. Each night, the voice returned. Every time the phrase got a bit clearer, I started to pick out distinct sounds. That name appeared again and again. I still didn't fully understand it, but I recognized the sound of it. It triggered this dull ache behind my eyes. My muscles felt tight. My shoulders were sore. I lost my appetite and felt tired most of the day. On the fourth night, something changed. I was sitting in the living room, dozing off around 2 in the morning. Then I heard my name spoken in that same deep tone. It wasn't the unfamiliar name anymore. It was my actual name. The voice spoke it slowly, like it was testing the way it sounded. My heart jumped. I shot up from the couch and almost dropped the flashlight. I went outside, trembling with each step. The night was still, and the well area was darker than usual because the moon was behind clouds. My flashlight beam shook in front of me. When I got near the well, I saw that the stone lid was shifted more than before. There was a bigger gap, maybe half a foot wide. Inside, it was black and silent. I heard water dripping. Then that low voice said my name again. My mouth felt dry. My throat felt constricted. I stepped closer and aimed the flashlight into the gap, but I couldn't see anything except the inner wall of the well. The stones were damp and there was a layer of green algae on them. Something moved in the darkness, but I couldn't tell what it was. My flashlight didn't reach that far. I felt a cold wind blow up from the well. It made my skin crawl. I wanted to run back to the house, but I couldn't turn away. It was like something drew me closer. I forced myself to stop at the edge. I said, "What do you want?" My voice sounded weak. I felt silly, like I was talking to a hole in the ground. There was a long pause. Then the voice spoke again. It said a series of words I didn't recognize. They were guttural and sharp. I heard my name at the end of the sentence. My pulse hammered in my ears. I smelled a faint odor of something damp and rotting, like vegetation that's been sitting in water too long. I backed up and bumped into a pile of old timber that was stacked near the well. It toppled over with a loud crash. In the silence that followed, the voice stopped. I walked backward until I reached my house. I locked every door. My hands were sweaty. My shirt stuck to my back. I sat on the floor by the window, clutching the flashlight, and stared out into the yard. I listened for more sounds. There were none. I felt alone and uneasy. Over the next few days, I tried to keep busy. I mowed part of the yard, even though it was a bit muddy from recent rain. I repaired a broken gate hinge. I avoided going near the well during the day. I felt an odd pull to check if the lid had shifted more, but I also feared it. Each time I let my mind wander, I pictured the gap growing wider. At night, I heard the voice again. It was stronger now. It repeated that strange name, and then it would say my name. It felt like a command. My chest felt tight whenever I heard it. My breathing got shallow. Sometimes my vision blurred for a second. It was hard to think straight. On the 6th night, I went out there with a crowbar and a hammer. I wanted to shift the lid back to its original place. I thought if I sealed it completely, maybe the voice would stop. I wore gloves and used a headlamp so I could keep my hands free. As soon as I got close, I heard water splashing down in the well. It sounded like movement, not just dripping. My stomach churned. I slid the crowbar under the edge of the stone and tried to lift it. The stone barely moved. I put all my weight into it, grunting and straining. The stone rose about an inch, then slipped back into the same spot with a heavy thud. I felt a sudden rush of cold air pour out of the gap. It felt like a blast from a freezer. My headlamp flickered. I heard the voice chanting something. My ears started ringing and I lost my grip on the crowbar. My heart felt like it was in my throat. I picked up my tools and stepped back. I saw a faint glow in the gap, but it could have been a reflection from my headlamp. I couldn't tell. I felt disoriented and dizzy. I fell on one knee, breathing hard. The chanting continued, and I realized it was repeating the same sequence of words. Some of them sounded like my name. Some sounded like that other name. My arms tingled, and I felt goosebumps spreading across my entire body. I forced myself to stand. I grabbed the hammer and swung it down on the stone lid, hoping to scare whatever was in there. The metal clanged against the stone, sending vibrations through my arms. It didn't crack or shift. The chanting stopped for a moment, then it resumed with a deeper tone. I left the crowbar there and ran to the house. My muscles ached, and my lungs burned from the cold air and the panic. Inside, I locked everything and turned on every light. I couldn't stop shaking. My thoughts were scattered. I stayed up until sunrise, pacing around, trying to come up with a plan. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That my old well was whispering? That I was hearing voices from underground? They would think I was nuts. I texted Carl again. He said he'd come the next day, late afternoon. That day felt endless. I kept away from the yard. I tried to watch TV. I tried to play some music. Every sound made me jump. I felt this constant pressure in my ears, like the air was heavier. Carl finally arrived around 5 in the evening. I felt some relief seeing his truck pull up. He's a sturdy guy, about my age, with a calm way of speaking. I took him to the well and showed him the lid. I didn't mention the voices, I just said it was loose and letting cold air out. He checked the stone, looked at the edges, and said it might weigh a couple 100 pounds. He thought we'd need a few tools or a small jack to shift it properly. As the sun started to set, I grew more anxious. I wanted to seal it before dark. We used a metal pole and a big jack that Carl keeps in his truck. We slipped the pole under the lid, jammed the jack in, and started pumping. The lid lifted. I saw a wave of cold air rush out, causing some dust to swirl around us. Carl coughed and turned his head, complaining about the smell. He said it reeked like stale water and mold. I nodded, trying not to show my tension. We worked the lid slowly. At one point, I saw the gap open wide enough that I could look straight down into the well. My headlamp was on. I saw wet stones dripping water and something moving against the wall. It was slimy and dark. I couldn't tell if it was a root or something else. Carl didn't notice because he was busy adjusting the jack. I felt sick to my stomach. My mouth went dry. The voice was silent, but I sensed a presence. We managed to position the lid so it covered the well more securely. Carl suggested pouring some concrete around the edges, but it was getting dark. He said we should finish tomorrow. We left the stone resting tightly, with less of a gap. He drove off, and I felt a bit of relief, hoping maybe this would stop the voices. Now it's past midnight. I'm writing this because I can't sleep. The house is quiet, but I'm on edge. My ears are tuned to every small sound. The lid is heavier on the well now, but I keep expecting to hear that whisper. My skin is clammy. I feel a tingling in my spine. I'm afraid that voice might come again, calling my name or that other name that I don't recognize but feel connected to. It's like a string is tied between me and whatever's down there. I don't know what it wants, but I feel it wants me to open that well. It wants out. I don't have a plan if this continues. I don't know if sealing it with concrete will work. Part of me wants to leave the property, but this is my home, and I don't want to abandon it. Another part of me wants to investigate more, but the thought makes me break out in a cold sweat. I keep thinking about the symbols on that stone cover. They looked sharper that first night, like they held some meaning. Now they seem faded again, as if they never changed. I wonder if my eyes were playing tricks on me. I just heard a creak outside. It might be the wind in the trees. I'm holding my breath, listening. My hands are shaking again. This is my life now. Every night I wait for that deep voice to speak. I feel it gaining some kind of hold on me. Each time I hear it, my heart pounds so hard it hurts. My mind goes blank, and all I can sense is this strange force pulling me toward the well. I'll try to fight it. I don't know how strong I am against whatever it is, but I have to try. If it calls me again tonight, I'll cover my ears, lock my doors, and hope the stone stays in place. I'm not sure if that will be enough. I first realized something was wrong when I saw my own reflection blink at the wrong time. That moment was like a jolt to my senses. I had always looked at myself in mirrors, windows, or any reflective surface, but I had never questioned what stared back. I was used to checking my expression, my posture, or whether there was something stuck in my teeth. It was a habit, not a concern. Then one night I was walking down the corridor in my house, and I passed the big mirror on the wall. In that second I noticed my reflection blink a half second later than I did. My eyes were open and my reflection's eyes were still closed. That moment threw me off balance. I even stumbled forward, gripping the edge of a small table to steady myself. I told myself it had to be a trick of the light. But it kept happening. And soon, there were more disturbing details than just a delayed blink. I live in a small house in a quiet neighborhood. It's a one-story building with 3 bedrooms, one of which I use as a home office. The corridor that leads to the bedrooms has a large mirror on the left wall. The floor is hardwood, and the ceiling lights are warm and dim. During the day, sunlight spills in through the windows at the end of the corridor, reflecting off that mirror and brightening the space. At night, though, the corridor feels cramped and a bit claustrophobic, especially when that warm, dim light casts shadows on every surface. I used to walk by that mirror without a single thought. I'd glance at it, maybe adjust my hair, and then go to bed. But after that first late-night incident with the delayed blink, I started paying attention. The next night, around midnight, I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. On my way back, I paused in front of the mirror to see if it would happen again. I kept my gaze on my reflection's eyes. I blinked once on purpose. My reflection blinked, but there was a moment of lag. The timing was off by just a fraction. I felt my stomach tighten. I leaned in closer, trying to examine my own face. Everything else looked the same. My nose, my lips, my short hair, even the faint lines on my forehead, except for the slight delay when I blinked. It was enough to make my heart speed up. I decided to test it further. I raised my right arm. My reflection raised its left arm, which made sense in a mirror. The motion was smooth, no delay. I tried a few more small movements, like turning my head or wiggling my fingers. Those actions matched perfectly. Only the blinking felt off. I stood there for at least 5 minutes, raising my eyebrows, moving my mouth, rotating my shoulders. The reflection kept up just fine. But whenever I blinked, the reflection came in a bit late. I couldn't explain it. I touched the mirror, pressing my fingertips against the cold surface. It felt solid. I even ran my hand across the frame, checking for loose fittings or cracks. Nothing. I turned away and walked to my bedroom, trying to push the incident out of my mind. Over the next few days, I became more aware of reflections around the house. The windows in the living room, the glass door leading to the backyard, the mirrors in the bathroom, even the shiny metal on the toaster. I would catch my own reflection and check if it matched my movements. Sometimes it did. Other times I saw that slight lag, and it wasn't just my eyes anymore. Sometimes my reflection would tilt its head a bit after I did, or I'd notice my lips parted in the reflection when my own mouth was closed. These moments were quick, easy to dismiss if I wanted to, but I couldn't ignore them for long. One night I tried to calm myself by watching TV in the living room. I turned off most of the lights, leaving only a floor lamp by the couch. Around 2 a.m., I caught a glimpse of myself in the dark window. My reflection stood there, eyes fixed on me as if I was being watched by someone else. I leaned forward and noticed my reflection's head was tilted slightly to the left, even though my own head felt straight. I shifted on the couch and craned my neck to match the position. Then I blinked. The reflection's eyelids dropped a moment too late. A cold shiver went down my spine. My mouth felt dry, and I gripped the couch cushion. I felt a wave of nausea, like I was seeing something I shouldn't. I got up and went to my bedroom. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I imagined my reflection moving without me. I stayed awake for hours, listening to the faint hum of the air conditioner and trying not to think about what I had seen. The tension got worse the following week. I started working from home more, hoping that keeping busy would distract me. But the more time I spent at home, the more I saw those odd delays. One day, I decided to test it in a controlled way. I set up my phone's camera in front of the bathroom mirror. I wanted to record myself to see if my mind was playing tricks on me. I hit record, stood in front of the mirror and moved my arms in a sequence. I blinked multiple times, trying to see if the camera would capture the delay. Then I transferred the video to my computer, watching it over and over. In the recording, everything looked normal. There was no delay in the reflection. My blinking matched perfectly. It drove me crazy. I knew what I had seen with my own eyes, yet it wasn't there on the video. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I lay in bed staring at the dark ceiling, feeling my chest tighten. I thought maybe I was losing my grip on reality. A few days later, something new happened. It was around 11 p.m., and I had just finished brushing my teeth. As I walked past the corridor mirror, I heard a strange whisper. It was low and raspy, almost like an exhale, but I caught my name in it. Daniel. That's my name. I stopped in my tracks. The hairs on my arms stood up. I looked around, but there was no one else in the corridor. The house was silent except for the faint buzz of the bathroom light. My heart raced. I turned to face the mirror and saw my reflection looking back. I said nothing, but I felt this urge to speak, like I needed to fill the silence. My throat was dry and I could taste my own fear. I just stared. My reflection stared too. I blinked a few times, but I couldn't see any delay at that moment. Then I heard the voice again, quietly muttering my name as if it was coming from behind the glass. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the mirror, and quickly walked to my bedroom, shutting the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I was being watched. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was stress. I told myself I needed rest, maybe a vacation. But then, the events escalated. That afternoon, I was walking past a window in the living room. I saw my reflection in the glass. I was glancing at it to make sure I didn't look too exhausted, but it smiled at me. I wasn't smiling at all. My lips were pressed together, but my reflection was grinning, showing teeth. I staggered backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table. My reflection's grin lingered for about a second, then it vanished, lining up with my own neutral expression again. I felt hot all over, and I had a tingling sensation at the back of my neck. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone from the table. I thought about calling someone, maybe a friend or a doctor, but I couldn't figure out what to say. Would I tell them my reflection was out of sync and smiling at me when I wasn't smiling? Over the next few days, the out-of-sync moments became more frequent. Sometimes I would be rinsing a dish in the sink and see my reflection in the window above the counter, only to notice it watching me with a slight tilt of the head I didn't have. Other times, I'd be in the bathroom washing my hands, and my reflection would delay its movements, almost as though it had its own timing. Each time, I felt this tightness in my chest and a lump in my throat. The tension built up in my shoulders and my stomach churned. I tried covering mirrors. I hung a towel over the mirror in the corridor. I kept the bathroom light off whenever I didn't need it. I avoided looking at windows. I tried to ignore any reflective surfaces. For a while, it helped. If I couldn't see my reflection, it couldn't mess with my head. But in a strange way, I felt like that presence was still there, just waiting. I'd walk by the covered mirror and feel a prickle on my skin, as if someone behind the cloth was staring at me. It made my heart pound, and I'd start sweating. One night I got fed up. I was tired of being afraid. It was around 1 a.m., and I decided to confront the mirror in the corridor. I took the towel down. I stood in front of that mirror with the hallway light on. I looked myself in the eye, waiting for something weird to happen. My reflection stared back at me, motionless, matching me perfectly. The house was quiet. My heart was thumping hard in my chest. My palms felt clammy and I was breathing faster than usual. Still, nothing happened for about a minute. I was about to turn away when I heard that familiar whisper again, right behind the glass. I couldn't make out the words this time, but it sounded like my name. I felt a chill on my arms. Then my reflection's lips twitched into a slight smirk. I wasn't smiling. My lips were tight, my jaw was clenched, but in the mirror I saw that smirk. My reflection then winked at me. My eyes were both open. The difference was immediate, like seeing two different people. I stepped back. My reflection seemed to follow my move in real time, but it kept that smirk. I felt my mouth go dry. My legs felt weak. I spoke, my voice shaky. "Who are you?" I said. The reflection mouthed something, but I didn't hear any sound. My own lips hadn't moved. I looked at my hands. They were trembling. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, and the back of my neck was damp with sweat. I wanted to look away, but I forced myself to keep eye contact with that thing in the mirror. I demanded again, "Who are you?" My reflection mouthed something else, and this time I heard a low hiss through the glass. It was short, just a breath, but it made my skin crawl. Then, the reflection's expression snapped back to neutral, lining up with mine as though nothing had happened. I scrambled backward and ran to my bedroom, slamming the door shut. I leaned against it, breathing hard. I could feel my pulse in my temples. I stood there for a minute, trying to steady myself. My hands were shaking so much it was hard to keep them still. Finally, I locked the bedroom door and closed the curtains. I didn't want to see my reflection anywhere. I stayed up all night, sitting on the edge of the bed, listening for any strange sounds. I didn't hear anything else, but I felt this heavy presence in the house, like I wasn't alone. In the morning, I packed a bag and left. I went to stay at a friend's place across town. I avoided mirrors and reflective surfaces as much as I could. But even at my friend's apartment, I'd catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror sometimes. I'd see it blink or move normally, and I'd think I was safe. Then I'd detect a tiny movement that was out of sync, like a glitch. It never stopped reminding me that it was still there, and it wasn't just me I was looking at. The worst part was the voice. I started hearing it in quiet moments, even when I wasn't near a mirror. A low, rough whisper calling my name, making my chest tighten. I'd feel a chill on my arms. Sometimes I'd even jump, thinking someone was behind me. But I'd turn around and find nothing. I don't know what it wants or why it singled me out. I don't know if it's a trick of my own mind or if something else has taken my shape on the other side of the glass. All I know is that when I see that delayed blink, or that smile that doesn't match, my stomach twists with fear. My heart pounds so hard I feel it in my throat. My skin turns clammy and I can't control the shaking in my hands. I haven't returned to my house in days. My friend thinks I'm just stressed out and anxious, that maybe I need therapy or more sleep. I haven't told him all the details. I'm afraid he'll think I'm losing it. Maybe I am. But the delayed blink, the voice, and that twisted grin in the reflection felt too real. I can't ignore it anymore. Now, whenever I see any kind of reflection, I brace myself. I check if it's matching my movements or if it's half a second behind with a different expression. I hate feeling this jumpy, but I don't know what else to do. Sometimes at night I think about that mirror in my corridor and wonder if something is waiting for me to come back. I picture it standing there, in that reflective surface, smiling at an empty hallway. I can almost hear the rough whisper of my name echoing through the silence, and it makes my heart race all over again. The moment I stepped off the train, I felt a jolt in my chest. It was the middle of the afternoon, yet the station was nearly empty. My legs were tired from the trip, and the air felt thick against my skin. I glanced around for anyone who might have come to pick me up, but nobody was there. I felt uneasy right away, but I couldn't tell why. Then I saw that dark shape on the ground near me. I stopped and looked up, expecting to see someone standing there. But there was no one. I stood still for a second. My breathing was shallow. I looked at my own shadow. It was exactly where it should be, slanting off to my right. Then there was this other shadow a couple of feet away. It had no owner, no visible person to match it. I shifted my position. It seemed to shift too, though not exactly in sync with me. I thought it might be some weird trick of the overhead lights or the sun through the station's canopy. but the more I moved, the more it acted like it was responding to me. It made my stomach churn. I forced myself to move toward the exit, dragging my suitcase behind me. I glanced down again. That second shadow slid across the concrete, a few steps behind me. Nobody else was on the platform, so it definitely wasn't another passenger's outline. I thought maybe my eyes were playing games after the long trip. I picked up my pace. My shirt stuck to my back. My mouth felt dry. I didn't want to turn around, but I had to. I looked back. The shadow was still there. It wasn't shaped exactly like a human. It was a bit lopsided, the edges unclear. I got outside the station. The air felt cooler, but I was sweating. My car was parked in the tiny lot out front. I popped the trunk, threw my bag in, and slammed it shut. I looked down. That shadow had followed me. It stretched across the ground, shifting in a slow, jerking motion. I hopped into the driver's seat, telling myself I was just exhausted. As I pulled out of the lot, I caught sight of something dark flickering near my car door. I felt a pinch of panic in my throat, but I pushed the accelerator and left the station behind. When I got home, I tried to forget about it. I grabbed some takeout food, turned on the TV, and stretched out on the couch. My head was pounding and my eyes stung. I told myself I just needed rest. But I had trouble sleeping that night. Whenever I closed my eyes, I pictured that extra shadow on the ground following me. I woke up in a sweat a few times, checking my surroundings. The bedroom was dimly lit by the streetlight outside. Nothing odd jumped out at me. I eventually fell into a restless sleep, hoping that the weirdness would end by morning. It didn't. The next day, I went outside to toss the garbage. I walked along the side of the house, and there it was again. That same shadow. It was offset from my own by a short distance, like it was trailing just behind me. I froze, holding the trash bag, my heart pounding. I tried to see if there was anything overhead that could create a second silhouette. There was nothing there. No tree branches, no telephone wires, no objects. I peered up at the sky, just scattered clouds. But on the ground, clear as day, was that extra dark outline. My heart beat faster. I backed up against the wall, hoping to stand in a shady area so it would vanish. It moved with me, creeping along the ground in the sunlight. I held my breath for a few seconds, then dumped the trash, hurried back inside, and locked the door. I spent the rest of that day trying not to look at the floor or the ground in front of me. Every time I took a step, I felt prickles in my neck, like something was right behind me, mimicking my movements. Late in the afternoon, I decided to go for a walk. I convinced myself that maybe I was imagining it. If I went out in public, maybe I'd see that it was just normal shadows from light poles or something else. I walked down my street. The sun was high, and my shadow stretched in front of me. But there was that extra patch of darkness, a little crooked, following on the sidewalk. I heard a couple of cars go by, but nobody seemed to notice anything strange. My mouth was dry again and my hands felt clammy. My skin tingled. I wanted to ask someone if they saw it, but I also didn't want people to think I was crazy. So I kept walking, eyes darting around, checking every corner of the street. Over the next few days, it changed. It started looking more distorted, like it was bending at the edges. I'd see it crouch low, the shape's top shifting into a hunch. It was like a figure trying to stay close to the ground. It never showed arms or legs in clear detail. It was always just a blob, but it seemed to be trying to take some kind of form. I tried to ignore it by staying indoors and keeping the lights off as much as possible. That didn't help. Whenever there was even a hint of light, I saw it in the corner of my eye. It made my heart pound whenever I caught sight of it. Sometimes it looked like it was a few feet away, other times right next to my own shadow. I stopped sleeping well. I paced around my house, checking each room for anything out of place. I found nothing but normal household objects. Still, every time I walked from one room to another, I felt like that dark outline was sliding across the floor behind me. My hands shook. My breathing sounded loud in my ears. I tried standing still in a corner to see if it would stop. Even with most lights off, a faint glow came in from the windows, enough to show my shape on the wall. That other shadow was always there, shifting and twitching. I couldn't pin it down. It was always moving in a delayed or awkward way. Sometimes I'd lift my arm, and that other thing would move half a second later, not in the same angle. It made my scalp tingle. I was afraid to sleep because I couldn't guess what would happen if I stopped paying attention. One day I decided to head back to work. I wanted some sense of normal routine, hoping that the familiar setting might ground me. I work at a small office doing admin stuff, nothing stressful. I got up early, took a shower, and avoided looking at my reflection. I hurried out the door and hopped in my car. The drive felt strange. Every now and then, I glanced at the passenger seat, expecting to see something, but it was empty. Yet I knew that shadow was somewhere, probably outside in the sunlight, skittering beside the car. My palms felt sweaty, and I kept wiping them on my pants at stoplights. At the office, I tried to stay busy with spreadsheets and emails. I kept the window blinds closed. My coworker, Mike, stopped by my desk a couple of times to chat. He asked if I was okay because I looked tense. I just shrugged and said I was tired. I didn't want to tell him what was going on. While he stood there, I looked down at the floor behind him. I saw only his shadow and mine. There was no extra shape. For a second, I felt relieved. But as soon as he left, I got up to grab a coffee from the break room. The overhead lights in the corridor were bright. That's when I saw it again, sliding along behind me, hugging the base of the wall. I gulped. My mouth tasted sour. I tried to calm myself by focusing on the present. I listened to the hum of the office air conditioning. I felt the plastic coffee cup in my hand. It was hot to the touch. My fingernails dug into the cup as I walked back to my desk. That other shadow followed, edging closer. I sat down, took a sip, and typed on my keyboard with shaky fingers. My eyes flickered to the floor. The shape pressed itself against the side of my chair, as if it wanted to merge with my own outline. I felt my heart beating too fast. That night after work, I drove home in a daze. I parked in my driveway, stepped out, and immediately looked down. The street lamp was on, shining onto the sidewalk. My shadow was clear, but the second one was there too, crouching lower than ever, like it was halfway collapsed. My knees felt weak. I hurried inside. I locked the door and stood in my living room, breathing hard. My chest felt tight. I flicked on the overhead light. I saw my shadow on the carpet. Then I saw that other blotch near the wall. It was smaller in the soft light, but it was definitely there, quivering a bit at the edges. I decided I had to do something drastic. I turned off every light inside, grabbed a flashlight, and went down to the basement. It's not a pleasant space, just concrete walls and a bare floor. I thought maybe if I stayed in total darkness, the shadow would disappear or detach. I switched off the flashlight and sat against the wall in pitch black. I heard the furnace hum and felt the cold floor against my legs. My heart pounded so loud that my ears felt plugged. After a few minutes in the dark, I switched the flashlight back on. I pointed it at the floor. I saw my shadow, and I saw that other thing. It looked like it had expanded to fill part of the empty space on the floor, its shape indefinite. I dropped the flashlight and scrambled up the stairs. My legs were shaking. I slammed the basement door shut behind me, though I knew a door wouldn't stop something with no real form. The tension kept building. Over the next few days, I tried everything I could think of. I avoided bright lights. I tried standing in corners. I stood behind furniture. The shadow never vanished. It just shrank or shifted. Sometimes when I looked down, it appeared to crawl along, a few feet away. Other times it lined up right next to mine. It was draining. I couldn't eat much. I felt my stomach tighten at every meal. I lost weight. My jeans got loose around my waist. One afternoon, I opened all the curtains in my living room. I stood in the middle of the sunlight, staring at the two dark shapes on the floor, mine and the other one. I spoke out loud, telling it to go away, though I didn't expect any response. I heard my own voice echo in the empty room. I felt sweat trickle down my back. The second shadow twitched like it was rippling. I froze in place. I realized I was more terrified of it fusing with my own shadow than I was of it just being there. The idea of it merging with me made my blood run cold. I tried going back to that station, thinking maybe I could leave it where I found it. I parked my car at the exact spot. The platform was nearly empty again, just a couple of people waiting for the next train. I got out, walked around, and tried to see if it would detach. It stayed with me. I stood close to the tracks, feeling the rumble of an approaching train under my feet. My clothes rustled in the breeze as the train whooshed by. I looked down and the shadow jerked along the platform next to me. After the train passed, I stayed there alone. I waited half an hour, pacing, trying different angles in the station's light. It never left. Eventually, I gave up and went back to my car, cursing under my breath. Later that night, as I sat on my couch, I realized I was exhausted from this constant vigilance. My eyes burned from lack of sleep and my nerves felt frayed. I tried to watch television, but the flickering light on the wall kept drawing my attention to that shape. It stretched and shrank in the changing glow from the screen. My spine tensed up. I turned the TV off and sat there in silence. I felt my heart thudding in my chest. My limbs were stiff. I don't know how this ends. I don't have a neat solution. All I know is that this thing is here, and it's not going away on its own. I feel it watching me when I stand still. I feel it moving when I move. It tries to match my gestures, but it's clumsy and delayed. Sometimes, when I least expect it, I catch a glimpse of it trying to overlap with my own shadow, like it wants to lock on and become a single shape. That's when my skin crawls the most. I've stopped inviting people over because I can't explain what's going on, and I'm not sure if they'd even see it the way I do. Every day I struggle with the idea that maybe I'm losing my mind, but I can't shake the feeling that there's an actual presence here. It's not just a flicker of light. It's not my imagination. It moves with an intent I can't figure out. It doesn't act like a normal shadow. It contorts and shifts. It's always watching, and I'm tired of feeling cornered in my own house. Right now, I'm sitting at my kitchen table, writing this all down. I can see the faint outline of that thing on the floor next to me. It's crouched low, edges trembling. My stomach is in knots and my breath is coming in short bursts. I don't know if I can handle this much longer, but I also don't know who to call or where to go. I'm afraid if I leave, it'll follow me wherever I run. Or worse, it'll attach to me in a way I can't escape. I'm going to try to sleep now. I've closed all my blinds. I've turned off most lights. The living room lamp is the only one on and it's dim. The shadows in here are soft and vague, but I can still make out my own shape on the carpet and the second one close by. It's never gone for good. It's just waiting for the right moment. My heart pounds just thinking about it. My fingers are shaking while I finish these last sentences. I hear the quiet hum of the fridge. There's a faint buzz from the lamp. That's all I can hear. I'm alone in here, but I don't feel alone. That's the worst part. I have no big conclusion. I only know that something's with me. It's not disappearing, and I can't force it to leave. If I have to keep going, I'll do it one day at a time, watching my feet, trying to avoid letting that shape overlap mine completely. If I ever figure out how to separate from it, I will. But until then, every step I take reminds me I'm not the only one in my own shadow. And that realization makes my chest tighten every time I walk across the room, afraid of what might happen if I let my guard down. I still remember the day I decided to check the attic. The thought had been nagging at me for years, even though most of my relatives warned me that there was nothing worth seeing up there. They said it was just an old storage space that nobody bothered to clean out. But I couldn't let go of the curiosity. I'd always wondered why we left that attic alone. The door was always visible, and I never saw a lock or chain on it. It just sat there with its faded wood and rusted hinges. One afternoon, I finally worked up the nerve to climb those stairs and see for myself. When I reached the top, I felt my heart pounding hard. The door groaned when I pushed it open, like it had gone decades without a drop of oil. The noise sent a chill through me. My palms felt damp and my breathing got shallow. I told myself it was just an old attic door, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air smelled stale, like old books and rotting cloth. It wasn't overwhelming, but it made me want to cover my mouth. Inside, the attic was dark. A single overhead bulb hung from the low ceiling, but the switch did nothing when I flicked it. I dug a small flashlight out of my jacket pocket and clicked it on. Dust drifted through the beam of light. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and I felt a strange sense of unease. My arms tingled with goosebumps. I thought I heard a faint sound like a low hum or chant, but it seemed to stop when I pointed my flashlight around the space. I saw old trunks stacked along the walls. They were covered in thick layers of dust. Some were sealed with old metal latches, and others looked like they had been left open. The insides were packed with yellowed papers, tattered clothes, and random odds and ends. I noticed that everything looked a lot older than my parents' stuff. These items seemed like relics from a different era. I wanted to dig through them, but that faint chanting sound started up again and it distracted me. The noise was low, almost like a group of voices in a distant room. It seemed to come from a darker corner of the attic, behind a pile of crates and broken chairs. My throat went dry. I glanced over my shoulder, even though I knew no one else was there. I took a few careful steps forward and aimed my flashlight at the far corner. The beam lit up a large circular mirror leaning against the wall. The edges had strange symbols carved into the wooden frame. I couldn't identify them, but they looked twisted and uneven. The glass surface had a thin layer of dust, but I could still make out my reflection. My face looked pale and tense. For a moment, I felt drawn to the mirror. I can't say why. It was just a piece of furniture, but something about it made my stomach tighten. I reached out and brushed some dust off the frame, and the chanting in the background got louder. It didn't feel friendly or peaceful. It felt cold, like an unsettling hum that made my hair stand on end. My mind told me to leave that thing alone, but my curiosity kept me standing there. I crouched down and noticed small shapes carved along the bottom of the frame. They might have been letters or symbols. They weren't familiar to me. My flashlight flickered a bit and my heart skipped a beat. I adjusted the battery cap, trying not to panic. The chanting seemed to pulse in the darkness, filling my ears. I started to sweat. My hands felt shaky. I stood back up and shined the flashlight around the attic, looking for some sort of speaker or maybe a radio. I found nothing. There was only the mirror, the crates, the trunks, and a few pieces of broken furniture. I swallowed hard and took a step closer to the mirror. I thought maybe the chanting was my imagination, but it felt real. It echoed off the walls in a low, repetitive tone. I told myself I was just spooked. I tried to act rational. I moved away from the mirror and walked toward an old trunk. I flipped the latch and opened the lid. Dust floated into the air and I coughed. Inside, there were faded photographs in black and white. Some showed people in formal clothing, but I didn't recognize them. I spotted a few old postcards, a stack of letters in envelopes tied with twine, and some thick books that looked like journals. I picked up one of the books and flipped through it. The handwriting was neat, but the language looked like older Portuguese. I couldn't understand all of it, just a few scattered words. The chanting noise kept drawing my attention back to the mirror. I slammed the trunk shut and turned around. The mirror's surface reflected a corner of the attic that was swallowed in shadow. My flashlight seemed dimmer than before, even though I had just put new batteries in it the week before. My hands were slick with sweat. I wiped them on my jeans. I approached the mirror again, stepping around a broken chair. I heard the wood scrape against the floor, and the chanting paused. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest. The chanting started again, louder this time, like it was responding to my movement. My legs felt shaky. I kept walking toward the mirror, even though I wanted to turn around and leave. When I got closer, I crouched and aimed the flashlight at the symbols along the edge. They were more detailed than I realized. Some looked like small animals, or faces with hollow eyes. Others looked like spirals, or lines crossing each other. The wood was chipped and dull. I reached out and touched one of the carvings. It felt rough and cold, as if it had been sitting in a drafty basement for years. A sudden chill ran through my fingers, and I pulled my hand back. I tried to breathe steadily, but my chest felt tight. I stood up and looked into the dusty glass. My reflection stared back at me. My mouth was drawn tight, and there were dark circles under my eyes. The chanting filled my ears, and it almost felt like it was in my head. I wanted to smash the mirror or run downstairs, but I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the floor. My pulse hammered in my throat. After a few seconds, I forced myself to step back. I switched off the flashlight for a moment, thinking maybe I could pinpoint where the chanting was coming from if the attic was darker. That was a mistake. The entire space went black, and the chanting kept going, throbbing in my ears. My mind conjured images of someone standing right behind me. I spun around in the dark, flicked the flashlight back on, and aimed it at every corner of the attic. The chanting never stopped, but I didn't see anyone. I felt a surge of panic. My breath came in quick bursts. My chest felt hot, and a shiver crawled up my spine. I convinced myself that I had to leave the attic at least for the night. I didn't feel safe. That was the clearest thought I had at that moment. I hurried back toward the door, hoping it wouldn't jam. The floor creaked under each step. When I reached the door, I nudged it open, and it groaned like an animal in pain. I rushed downstairs and shut the attic door behind me. I leaned against the wall and took a few deep breaths. My shirt clung to my back, soaked with sweat. The hallway felt normal and quiet, like any other day. I tried to calm down by taking slow breaths. The chanting was gone. My heart rate started to settle, but my mind was buzzing. I couldn't stop thinking about the mirror and those carved symbols. For a few days after that, I avoided the attic. I went about my usual routine. I worked, ate, and slept. But I kept picturing that dusty old attic and the strange chant echoing in my ears. At night, I dreamed about opening the trunk and finding more old journals. Sometimes I dreamed about hearing voices whisper my name. I woke up with a start more than once, my sheets damp and twisted around me. One evening, the curiosity became too strong. I grabbed my flashlight along with a fresh set of batteries and headed back upstairs. The attic door still had that same shrill creak. The air was still stale. Dust motes danced in the weak light. I stepped inside, bracing myself for that chanting, but at first I only heard the soft hum of the house's plumbing. I exhaled in relief. I walked over to the trunks again. I wanted to get a better look at whatever was inside them. I knelt and flicked open the latch on a different trunk than before. Inside, I found more letters and a few old family documents. Some of them had official seals. They were brittle and yellow. I set them aside and pulled out a small wooden box. It smelled faintly of mold. I pried it open and found a set of old keys. Each had a different shape. The metal was discolored. My hand shook a bit when I picked them up. Then that chanting started again, very low at first. I held my breath and listened, but it was still muffled, like it was coming from another room. I stood up with the flashlight, leaving the trunk open. I walked in a slow circle around the attic, stepping over broken chairs and old suitcases. The sound guided me back to the mirror. I hated how my stomach dropped when I realized where I was headed. The reflection in the mirror showed my flashlight beam in the corner behind me. Nothing else. My throat felt tight, and I tried to swallow. The chanting got louder, and I felt an odd pressure in my ears. I lifted my free hand to my ear like I was trying to clear water out of it. Then I noticed the mirror's surface looked clearer than before, like someone had wiped off the dust. My reflection was sharp. I could see every line on my face. My eyes looked bigger. I felt pinned by my own gaze. I wanted to break that mirror, but fear kept me from doing anything too drastic. I tried to look away, but I thought I saw movement in the reflection. It was like a shifting shadow behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight, but all I saw was the same pile of junk. When I turned back, the chanting faded for a second. That short silence made me realize how tense my muscles were. I noticed my knees felt weak, and there was a slight tremble in my hands. I thought about calling a friend to come over, but I didn't want to explain why. I felt embarrassed, but also scared. I stepped away from the mirror, keeping my eyes on it until I reached the attic door. The chanting stayed at that same low volume, echoing in the background. I reached for the doorknob, and the chanting rose in pitch. My chest tightened. I yanked the door open and rushed out, flicking off the flashlight as I went. I forced the attic door shut with my shoulder. It made that same horrible groaning sound, then clicked closed. I stood there in the dark hallway, breathing hard, my back pressed against the door. That night I barely slept. My thoughts swirled, and my muscles felt sore from tension. I kept hearing that droning chant in my head. My ears felt like they had a lingering ring, the way they do after standing too close to loud machinery. The next morning I drank coffee and stared at the attic door from the living room, trying to decide what to do. I thought about telling someone else in my family, but I couldn't bring myself to explain the chanting or the weird mirror. I sounded crazy even in my own head. I decided to leave the attic alone for a while. The chanting seemed tied to that mirror, and I couldn't handle that presence. I felt exhausted, and my nerves were shot. For a few days I didn't hear anything strange. I kept my distance from the attic, but I couldn't stop myself from glancing up the stairs whenever I passed by. The door looked innocent enough, just an old wooden door with a tarnished knob. I can't say I have any tidy conclusion. I never found a logical explanation for that chanting or those symbols on the mirror frame. Even now, when I walk through the hallway at night, I feel a cold spot near the attic door. Sometimes my hair stands up for no reason. I try to ignore it. I stay away from that attic, even though I know those trunks are still there. I know the mirror is still leaning against the wall, waiting for someone else to go inside. I don't plan to open that door again. The chanting hasn't stopped in my mind, even if I can't always hear it. I tell myself I can live with the questions, but it's hard. Whenever the house is quiet at night, I think I hear that low hum, like voices chanting in some distant room. I grip my blankets tight and close my eyes, willing myself to sleep. I try to remind myself that the attic is just a room filled with dusty junk, and yet every time I think about the carved mirror and that sound, my heart starts racing. I don't know what lies behind that glass, and I'm not sure I want to find out. I felt uneasy the first time I noticed the red ink on those yellowed pages. Before that, I never imagined an old diary could cause me this much stress. At first glance, it looked like any generic antique book with a worn leather cover and blank sheets inside. I got it as a gift from an old acquaintance who collected vintage stationery. I was grateful but never used it. I left it on my desk, thinking I might write down a few ideas or reminders someday. It stayed there for weeks untouched, until I realized I wasn't the only one who had plans for it. I remember standing in my bedroom late one afternoon, looking at the diary under the light from my desk lamp. The pages were open. That surprised me because I had left it closed the night before. I took a step closer and my hands felt shaky. There was this faint red scribble in the top corner of the left page. It was just a short line of messy handwriting. I leaned in, and I saw a note about me brushing my teeth at exactly 7:15 a.m. that day. No one knew that was the exact time I brushed my teeth that morning. I hadn't told anybody. It wasn't a big secret or anything, but it was weirdly accurate. My immediate reaction was to check if someone else had been in my home. I went to the living room, locked the front door, and then I walked through every room, opening closet doors and checking behind curtains. I didn't see any signs of a break-in. All the windows were locked from the inside. I switched on every light, pacing from one area to another. My heart was pounding, and I had a tight feeling in my stomach. I ended up back in the bedroom, staring at the diary on my desk. I sat down on the chair. I tried to keep my breathing calm, but it felt forced. I flipped through the pages. Most of them were blank, except for a few random lines in that same red ink. The diary mentioned what time I left for work, what time I had my coffee, and even the number of times I checked my phone during lunch. I started sweating and felt my pulse beating hard in my neck. I didn't know who could be writing these things. I couldn't figure out why anyone would care. The next morning I woke up and checked the diary before doing anything else. It was closed. I opened it carefully and my eyes darted across the pages. Nothing had changed. I let out a breath of relief, then got ready for the day. I tried to push it out of my mind as I showered, but I still felt uneasy. My shoulders were tense and I kept looking around as if someone was watching me. My apartment felt too quiet. That evening, after a long day at work, I walked into my bedroom. The diary was open again. I stood in the doorway and my mouth went dry. The pages were turned to a section in the middle I didn't recognize. Lines of text ran all over both sides, all in that red ink. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I went closer and started reading. The diary listed the items I had ordered at lunch, and it included a note about a private phone call I had made during my break. It mentioned the content of that call, or at least the parts I remembered. I never told anyone about that call. I felt a strange pressure in my chest, like I couldn't breathe properly. I stepped back from the desk and ran a hand across my face. I wanted to put the diary away, throw it in a drawer, or maybe leave it at the back of a closet. But the thought of ignoring it made my skin crawl. It felt like the diary was demanding my attention. I didn't want to give in, but I also couldn't ignore it. So I closed the cover, slid it into a drawer, and locked it. Then I left the room and sat on my couch in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen. My breath was shallow, and I kept looking over my shoulder at the hallway. I was scared. I could feel my heart thumping in my chest, and my hands were cold. After a few minutes of sitting there, I decided to check all the doors and windows again. Everything was locked. There were no signs of forced entry. I set up a small chair against my bedroom door so I'd hear it if anyone tried to get in. It felt absurd, but I had to do something. Then I managed to sleep, though my rest was full of sudden wake-ups. I kept hearing creaks and noises in the hallway. Sometimes I thought I saw a flicker of movement near the edges of my vision, like a shadow where there shouldn't be one. The following morning, I went to the bedroom, moved the chair aside, and opened the drawer. The diary was no longer there. My heart pounded as I looked around the desk. It was open on the top of the desk, right beside my notepad. I felt a chill run down my arms. I grabbed the diary and saw more notes about me, describing the way I had dozed off on the couch and mentioning the times I woke up during the night. There were even notes about the moments I looked at the hallway. My chest tightened. It felt like someone had followed my every move. The worst part was a new entry at the bottom of the page. It was a short sentence, written in red ink. "I know you want to throw me away." I stared at those words for a long time. I rubbed my eyes and blinked hard. It was still there. My breathing got faster, and my fingers felt numb as I turned the pages. More blank sheets stared back at me, except for a few that had random bits of my schedule. I felt exposed. I felt like the diary was mocking me. I dropped it on the desk, took a few steps back, and sat on my bed. I needed a plan, but I couldn't think straight. My mind jumped to the possibility of setting up a camera. So that's what I did. I spent the rest of the day buying a small motion-activated camera. That night, I placed it in the bedroom, pointing at the desk. I left the diary in full view, closed, and made sure the room was tidy so I could see if anything got moved around. Then I turned off the light, closed the door, and tried to sleep on the couch again. I felt like every sound in the apartment might be someone sneaking around. My heart was pounding so hard that I kept my eyes open for most of the night. At some point, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep. I woke up at dawn, my neck stiff from sleeping on the couch. I got up and tiptoed to the bedroom door. It was shut the way I left it. I opened it slowly. The diary was open on the desk. The pages were covered in more red ink. There was another sentence at the bottom. "You think a camera will help?" I froze. My body felt rigid. My knees felt weak, and I had to lean on the doorframe. That sentence seemed to address me directly. I checked the camera. The memory card was still inside. I grabbed it, took it to my computer, and tried to watch the footage. The recording started normally. The room was dark. The diary was closed on the desk. The camera kept rolling. Everything stayed still for hours. Then, the camera image went static for a second or two. When it came back, the diary was open and more words were on the pages. I could see them in the faint light from outside the window. The camera didn't capture any person or anything actually writing. The diary simply changed from closed to open while the screen flickered with that static. It sent a jolt through my body. My mouth felt dry, and a wave of goosebumps ran along my arms. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on normal tasks, but I couldn't stop thinking about the diary. I wanted to get rid of it, but I worried that might make things worse. The diary seemed aware of my thoughts, or at least it pretended to be. Every time I looked at it, I felt a drop of sweat run down my back. I decided to place it in a small locked box I had in the closet. I put the key in my pocket. Then I moved the camera so it faced the closet door. I wanted to see if anything would happen when it was sealed away. That night, I heard scratching noises in the apartment. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. It sounded like something brushing against the walls or the doors. My heart raced every time I heard it. I got up several times to check the closet, but it was closed. The scratching would stop whenever I got close. Then, as soon as I lay down, it started again. My chest felt tight and my temples were pulsing. It was almost morning when I finally drifted off. When I got up, I rushed to the closet. I unlocked the box. The diary was still inside, but it was open. The red ink covered several more pages. There was a line saying, "Boxes won't help. I'm always watching." My face went hot. My breath caught in my throat. My hands started shaking, and I could feel sweat forming on my forehead. I checked the camera footage on my computer. Again, it showed the closet door, but at some point, the image went static. It stayed that way for a few seconds. When it returned to normal, the closet door was slightly open, and the locked box was sitting on the floor. Then, the next moment of static, the box was back on the shelf, closed. It all happened without any visible person. It made me feel sick. I went around my apartment, checking every wall, every corner. I tried to see if there were hidden cameras or some elaborate trick. I found nothing. The entire place looked the same as always. Clean walls, normal furniture, no weird devices. My skin tingled and my eyes kept darting left and right, expecting to see something move. As the days passed, the diary continued to fill itself with red ink. It detailed everything I did or thought. Sometimes it even mentioned thoughts I was sure I hadn't spoken out loud. Whenever I tried to ignore it, new pages would be covered with personal details. Whenever I thought about destroying it, I found messages warning me not to. One time, the diary said, "If you burn me, you'll regret it." And I felt a knot in my stomach. I started seeing shadows move around the corners of my apartment. They weren't distinct shapes, just flickers of darkness shifting along the walls. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks on me, but I started hearing faint footsteps in the hallway, too. At night, when I turned off the lights, I could almost see these shadows gathering near the edges of the living room, then slipping away when I blinked. My heart pounded whenever I noticed them. I kept telling myself to stay calm, but my palms got sweaty, and my breathing turned shallow every time. It felt like the air in my place was getting thicker. One evening, I came home late. The living room light was on, but I was sure I had left it off. I stood in the doorway for a moment, feeling my pulse race. I called out a greeting, half expecting someone to answer. There was no response. I moved through the apartment, and each step felt heavy. The hallway was cold, and the bedroom door was shut. I opened it slowly. The diary was on the bed this time, completely open. The pages were filled with red ink, describing thoughts I'd had during my drive home, personal worries and random ideas. My hands trembled. I shut the diary, but it flipped open again in my grip. I felt the pages rub against my skin. The edges were rough, and the old paper had a musty smell. I dropped it and stepped back. Now, I find myself unable to relax in my own home. I keep all the lights on. But that doesn't stop the shadows from appearing in the corners. Sometimes I hear the pages rustling at night, even though the diary isn't near any open window or fan. Other times I find it resting in places I'm sure I didn't leave it, like the kitchen counter or inside my coat pocket. It's as if it's chasing me around the apartment, waiting for me to pick it up and read. Each time I read a new line, it's something I did in secret or a thought I swore was private. It mentions small details like how fast my heart is beating or how tense my shoulders are. It's always right. At this point, I'm keeping the diary on my desk, letting it stay open. I can't lock it up, I can't hide it. It doesn't matter. The more I fight it, the more active it becomes. If I leave it alone for more than a few hours, I come back to pages filled with new information, all in that same unsettling red ink. My home has become a place of constant tension. Every noise makes me jump. Every shadow on the wall makes my chest tighten. I don't sleep well. I keep waking up in the early hours, scanning the room for movement. The diary is always there, sometimes on the nightstand, sometimes on the floor. I can't predict where it will appear next. I'm sharing this because I need to let someone know. It's hard to carry this kind of secret alone. I can't pretend everything's normal when I feel like I'm being watched nonstop. I haven't told coworkers or neighbors because it sounds ridiculous. But the diary keeps documenting every part of my life. It knows things about me that I haven't shared with anyone. It reacts to my attempts to control it. If I ever threaten to get rid of it, the next pages come out even more invasive. I see new lines that talk about my frustration, my fear, and my anger. I see warnings that push me to keep it around. I sense that if I do something drastic, I might regret it in ways I can't understand. So, for now, I'm stuck. I live here with this diary, and the tension grows each day. The shadows keep me company at night, shifting around as if they're breathing along with me. Every once in a while, I catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. But when I turn, there's nothing there. I move through my own apartment feeling like a guest. My breathing stays shallow and my stomach churns. I can't stop glancing at the corners. I can't stop checking the diary every few hours. It's a habit now. I have to see what it's written. I'm trying to survive this strange situation. I write down my own notes in a separate notebook just to keep track of what's happening. I lock my doors. I set up cameras. None of it helps. The diary does what it wants, and it records every moment it chooses. Maybe one day I'll gather the courage to destroy it, maybe I won't. All I know is that right now it's here, and it won't leave me alone. And as long as I keep breathing, it keeps writing. That's where I am now, waiting for the next page to fill itself in red, trying to keep my fear in check and hoping it doesn't reveal more secrets I haven't even admitted to myself. I still remember the sound of those nails scraping against the drywall. It was sharp and steady, like somebody methodically dragging each fingertip along the surface. The first time I heard it, I thought I was imagining things, but it kept going, over and over, until I got up to check. That was the night I saw a pale hand vanish into that narrow crack in the wall. Since then, my nights have turned into a slow, grinding cycle of fear and restlessness. Every time I think it's over, I hear those scraping noises again and I feel my chest tighten. I don't know who he is. I don't know how he even fits inside the walls. All I know is that he's there, and he's watching me. I work in a small accounting office on the 7th floor of an old worn-out building downtown. The walls are thin, the pipes rattle, and the ventilation system groans whenever someone upstairs runs the air conditioning. Usually, I just ignore those weird sounds. It's an old place, and old places make noises. But that one night changed everything. I stayed late to finish a report. It was probably around 11 at night. I remember looking at the time on my computer and feeling the ache behind my eyes. The office was empty. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. The cleaning crew usually shows up around midnight, so I was by myself. I heard a quiet scratch, like someone running their fingernails on paper. At first I assumed it was just the building settling or some rodent, but the scratching grew louder and more precise. It wasn't random squeaking or scuttling. It was a steady, deliberate scrape. I decided to check it out. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and walked down the hallway. The corridor lights were off, and the only illumination came from the exit signs at both ends. The noise guided me to a spot near the corner office. I pressed my ear against the wall. It sounded like something was right inside, maybe a few inches behind the drywall. My heart thudded in my chest, but I wasn't scared yet, just curious. I tapped the wall lightly. The scraping stopped for half a second, then started again with more urgency. That was the moment I realized whatever it was could hear me. I aimed my phone's flashlight at the wall, hoping to see a hole or a crack. I saw almost nothing, just tiny imperfections in the old paint. Then I noticed a hairline gap between two panels. It was so narrow that I could barely fit the tip of my finger in it if I tried. I crouched closer, shining the light inside. That's when I saw the hand. The skin was pale, almost gray, with bony fingers and nails that looked too long. It withdrew the instant the light hit it, disappearing into darkness. I jumped back and let out a gasp. My mind raced with a million explanations. None of them made sense. For a few seconds, I froze in place, staring at that tiny gap. My hands shook and I felt sweat forming on my forehead. I remember whispering, "What the hell?" to no one. I stayed there, phone clutched in my right hand, until I realized I was standing in a dark hallway by myself with some unknown person, if it was a person, inside the wall. I ran back to my desk, grabbed my keys and bag, and rushed out. I almost forgot to lock the office door behind me. When I got home, my thoughts were all jumbled. I kept seeing that pale hand the way it jerked back out of sight. I tried telling myself I'd been working too hard. I was tired, maybe I saw something else, a rat's tail or some trick of the light. But I knew deep down what I saw. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that scraping sound in my head. I felt as if I was being watched, even though my apartment was locked up. Eventually I dozed off, but it wasn't restful. The next day at work, I considered telling my boss or a coworker. But how do you explain something like that? "Hey, I saw a pale hand in the wall last night. Could we tear the place open and see if there's a strange guy crawling around?" I imagined their faces. They'd probably laugh or think I was messing with them, so I kept my mouth shut and tried to focus on my job. I told myself I wouldn't stay late again. But deadlines have a way of forcing you to break your own rules. A week later, I had no choice but to stay after hours to finish a major client project. That night was worse. Around 10, I started hearing soft taps from inside the walls near my cubicle. Then I heard a faint squeaking in the vents, like someone was shifting metal slats. My neck tightened, and my eyes began scanning every corner. I felt an urge to leave right away, but I had a pile of documents to review. My plan was to rush through them as fast as I could and then get out. Half an hour later, the sounds grew louder. I heard nails scraping near the floor. The noise moved up the wall, like someone was climbing from one level to the next. I tried to ignore it, but it's hard to focus when it feels like there's a person creeping inside the building. I typed faster, trying to finish. At one point, I caught movement in the corner of my eye. I swiveled my chair to face the vent. It was just a small air vent near the ceiling. The office had the lights on, so I couldn't see much in that dark opening. But I saw a flicker of something that blocked a bit of light inside the vent. Maybe a face or a hand. I squinted, waiting for my eyes to adjust, but it disappeared. My throat felt dry, and my hands shook on the keyboard. I finished my work and left the building in a hurry. I told the security guard downstairs that I thought I heard an animal in the walls. He just shrugged and said maintenance would check it out in the morning. Part of me wanted to tell him the truth, but I couldn't do it. I just wanted to go home. Over the following weeks, I tried to keep normal hours, but there were 2 more nights when I had no choice but to stay late. Each time I heard the same sounds: scraping, tapping, and occasional low groaning. It wasn't like a person speaking. It was more like the sound of someone pushing against a tight space. It made the walls creak in places. Once I thought I heard a muffled cough from inside the ceiling, near the fluorescent lights. That's when it dawned on me that there really was somebody or something living in the guts of this building. I started avoiding certain areas at night. I didn't want to go near that crack in the wall where I first saw the hand. I always felt like it was waiting for me around that corner. One night I brought a small flashlight from home, a brighter one than my phone. I walked the halls for a few minutes after hours, shining the beam at every vent, every opening. I thought maybe I could at least scare it away or catch another glimpse, but I never saw more than a passing shadow. At one point I heard quick scraping footsteps inside the walls, heading away from me. It sounded like bare feet scuttling on metal beams. Sleeping became a challenge. I started hearing those noises in my apartment even though I knew they weren't actually there. I'd jolt awake at 2 or 3 in the morning, sweating and breathing hard. I'd grab my phone to check the walls, certain I'd hear that scraping. Of course, my apartment was quiet, but the memory of that sound stuck in my mind. I was always on edge, feeling like I was one bad dream away from snapping. During the day, the office was bright and busy. People chatted, phones rang, and the normal activity of the workplace drowned out any strange noises. But at night, everything changed. The building felt hollow. The air became stale, and every click of my keyboard echoed through the corridors. I found myself checking my surroundings every few minutes, glancing at the vents or corners, worried I'd see that hand again. A few weeks after the first incident, I tried to open up to a coworker, Alan, without giving too many details. I told him I thought we had a squatter in the building, someone who crawled through the old maintenance shafts or something like that. Alan laughed and said he wouldn't be surprised. The place was built decades ago, and there were rumors about people sneaking in from the abandoned sub-basement. He recommended I talk to building management. I called the management office and spoke to a woman who sounded bored. I explained I'd heard weird noises after hours, like an animal or a person. She told me they'd send someone to check the vents and walls. The next day, a maintenance guy showed up while I was at my desk. He knocked on the walls, flashed a light inside a few vents, and then told me he couldn't find anything. He said sometimes pigeons or rats can get in through the roof access. He suggested we set some traps. That was the end of it. No follow-up, no thorough inspection. He left a couple of rodent traps in a storage closet and called it a day. That night I stayed again to finish up some leftover tasks. Around 9, the power flickered for a second. The lights dimmed and then came back. I felt my stomach tense up. The building got very quiet, and I heard soft clicking sounds above the drop ceiling. They moved from one side of the room to the other like someone crawling around. I stood up, heart pounding, and tried to locate the sound. Suddenly, the ceiling tile in the far corner dipped slightly, like someone was pressing down on it. I grabbed my flashlight, pointed it at that corner, and watched. The tile moved up, then settled back into place. I could see dust drifting down. I didn't say a word. I slowly backed out of the office, keeping my eyes on that corner. When I reached the hallway, I heard nails scraping inside the walls again. It was behind me now, near the door I'd just come through. I ran for the elevator, cursing under my breath the whole way. My heart was racing so fast that my chest hurt. I didn't calm down until I was outside on the street, breathing in fresh air. The security guard gave me a weird look as I left. I didn't care. From that point on, I made it a priority to leave by 7 at the latest. If I had extra work, I took it home or came in early the next day. But sometimes, deadlines don't give you a choice, and clients are demanding. One Friday, I was forced to stay late to finish a big financial statement. I was nervous the entire evening. I tried to keep music on quietly at my workstation so I wouldn't hear every little noise. But around 11, I removed my headphones for a moment to make a phone call. That's when I heard the soft scraping start again, this time right behind the cubicle wall nearest to me. My stomach churned, and I felt goosebumps form on my arms. I didn't have a flashlight on me anymore, but I did have my phone. I turned on the flashlight app and slowly approached the cubicle wall. I tapped it with my knuckles. The scraping paused, then returned, more frantic now. It felt like a response. like it wanted me to know it was there. I pulled back, not sure what to do. My eyes scanned the ceiling, the corners, the vents. I didn't want to see that hand again. I didn't want to see a face in the cracks. But part of me felt compelled to check. Then I heard a sudden thunk, like something heavy hit a beam inside the wall. I jumped back and let out a shaky breath. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me flinch. It was the building's automated system, sending a text about an overnight HVAC test. I tried to steady my breathing, but I could still hear the scraping. It started moving away from me, sliding along the wall. I followed it into the corridor, terrified but also determined not to let it slip away without some clue. I reached that same spot near the corner office, where I'd seen the hand weeks ago. The gap was still there, barely noticeable. I raised my phone's flashlight to the crack and felt my pulse throbbing in my neck. I saw a shadow shift on the other side. A faint breath, or maybe a hiss, came from the gap. My scalp tingled, and my knees felt weak. I forced myself to stay steady. Then I saw movement. Something was peeking out at me. An eye, I think. It was too dark to be sure, but I swear I saw the glint of an eye looking right at my phone's light. My heart hammered so hard that I almost dropped the phone. Then it retreated, and the scraping faded down the wall. I stood there frozen for a long moment. My thoughts were scattered, and all I could think was, I need to get out. This isn't safe. I left the office right then, leaving my paperwork behind. I didn't even shut down my computer. I rushed to the elevator and pressed the button repeatedly. It felt like it took forever to arrive. When it finally did, I wrote it down, clenching my teeth and staring at the numbers, expecting the power to flicker again or the elevator to stop. But it didn't. I made it out of the lobby and onto the sidewalk. I took a long breath of the cold night air. It felt like I'd escaped a trap. Since that night, I can't relax at work. Even during the day, I imagine that thing crawling through the vents above me, sliding past the wiring, listening through the drywall. I'm terrified of being alone in any corridor. If I have to use the bathroom, I check the stalls and the ceiling vents before I lock the door. I try to avoid looking at the walls too long because I feel like I'll see some sign that he's there, waiting. Sometimes, I think I hear a quick scuttling noise, and I'll spin around, only to find nothing. I haven't talked to management again. They won't believe me. My co-workers have no idea how bad this is. I don't know who he is or how he survives in those cramped spaces. I don't want to think about whether he's dangerous. But every night, when I'm lying in my bed, I picture him creeping through the walls, searching for an opening, peering through vents, waiting for the right moment to watch me. I'm at my desk right now, typing this out. It's early evening and the office is almost empty. I keep hearing faint tapping somewhere behind me. I'm trying to ignore it, but my nerves are shot. My skin feels cold and my hands are trembling. Part of me wants to walk out and never come back, but I can't do that. I need my job. So I stay, and I try to pretend he's not there. But I hear him, and I feel his eyes through every vent, every crack, every gap in the floorboards. Knowing there's a man crawling silently inside the walls watching my every move, that's enough to keep me wide awake until morning. And I have no idea how to make him leave. I'm gripping the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles hurt. There's no one on this highway, at least that's what I thought. I keep glancing at the rearview mirror, even though I know I shouldn't. Every time I peek, I see a pale shape in the back seat. The first time I thought it was my imagination. It vanished as soon as I turned around. But it's there. I see it for a split second before it fades. Now I don't want to look anymore. But I can't help myself. My heart's racing and I can't stop sweating. The temperature inside the car feels normal, but my skin is clammy, and my shirt sticks to my back. I've driven at night 1,000 times before, but this time something's wrong. I started this drive around midnight. I wanted a clear road. I liked the feeling of cruising on the open highway without anyone in front of me. It's quiet out here. The only sounds I hear come from my tires on the asphalt and the low rumble of the engine. Sometimes I turn on the radio, but tonight I decided to keep it off. I wanted silence. Now I regret it. Every noise feels amplified. I hear the hum of the air vents, my own breathing, and the ticking of the cooling engine when I slow down. There's a faint rattle in the back, but I can't tell if it's my toolbox or something else. It happened maybe 2 hours into the drive. I was checking the mirror out of habit, making sure no one was behind me. That's when I saw a pale face in the reflection. It was sitting right behind my seat. Its eyes looked dull and the skin seemed washed out. My heart jumped, and I nearly slammed the brakes. But when I twisted around, nobody was there. The seats were empty. The only things in the back were my jacket and an empty water bottle. I tried to laugh it off, told myself I was tired, maybe I was dozing off. So I pulled over at the next rest stop. I got out of the car and took a few deep breaths. The air was cool but felt stale in my lungs. I stepped into the fluorescent light by the restroom area. The place was empty. I splashed water on my face, then stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked exhausted. My eyes were bloodshot, and I could see how tense my jaw was. I wondered if I should sleep in the car for a few hours, but I wanted to keep going. I wanted to reach my destination by dawn. I got back in thinking that maybe the break would clear my head. As soon as I pulled onto the highway again, I caught something in the corner of my eye. That shape in the back seat. It stayed for less than a second in the mirror. I felt a jolt in my stomach, like someone punched me from the inside. I tried to convince myself it was a reflection of the headlights from a passing truck. But there were no trucks. The road was empty. I told myself to calm down and focus on driving. I stared at the lines on the asphalt and tried to keep my mind blank. After a while, I realized that the shape showed up every time I glanced quickly at the mirror. If I looked for more than a second, it disappeared. It was like it only existed in that half-instant moment. My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel. I tried to keep my eyes forward, but not checking the mirror is impossible. You do it automatically when you drive. I noticed my heart pounding in my chest. My foot felt shaky on the gas pedal. The shape was definitely there, and it was shifting closer each time I spotted it. At first, it was just a blur. Then I could make out a faint outline of a person. Then I saw some features, like bony shoulders and a thin arm. After another 10 or 20 minutes, I noticed it was leaning forward. I could see the fold of what looked like a torn shirt collar. It was almost in the middle of the back seat, leaning between the front seats. I kept expecting to feel a hand on my shoulder. My breath was shallow and I kept swallowing because my mouth felt dry. Every time I glanced, it was closer. I tried to distract myself. I fiddled with the AC. I turned on the radio to a random station. The static hissed, then cut to a late-night talk show. The host was talking about political stuff, but I couldn't concentrate. I turned the volume up, hoping it would push that feeling of dread out of my head. For a few minutes, it helped me focus on something else. But then I looked in the mirror again, and the shape was there, inching forward. It looked like it was reaching out, maybe trying to touch my shoulder. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. My mind was racing. I wondered if I was going crazy, or if there was actually something behind me. My hands were shaking, and I could feel every bump in the road like a small shock through my spine. My eyes darted between the windshield and the mirror. The talk show host's voice was just noise now. The shape seemed more solid each time. It was still see-through, but I could see more details. I saw the contour of a face. I saw thin lips parted slightly. I saw dark spots where the eyes should be. I pressed down on the accelerator. My speed crept up and the engine growled louder. I just wanted to get off that deserted stretch as soon as possible. Maybe if I reached a city or a gas station with lights and people, I would stop seeing this thing. My entire body was tense. My shoulders ached, and I realized I was leaning forward in my seat. Out of desperation, I decided to speak out loud. I said, "Who's there? I know you're there." My voice sounded strained, and I coughed a bit. There was no response. The radio crackled, and I heard some bursts of static. I felt a presence behind me, like warm breath on the back of my neck, but the AC was blowing forward, so there was no reason for warm air on me. I tightened my grip on the wheel and stared at the road. The lines blurred under my headlights. Then I glanced again, and the figure was almost next to me. Its face was near the passenger seat, but it wasn't fully there. It flickered in and out. I could see it from the corner of my eye, but when I turned my head, I only saw the empty seat. That sent a chill through my entire body. I felt trapped in my own car. My seatbelt felt like a restraint. My breath came in fast bursts, and I tried to calm down, but I couldn't. I told myself to keep driving. Don't panic. Keep moving forward. The road was still empty, not a single car in sight. The moon was high, but the sky was clear. There were no streetlights, just those reflectors on the roadside. I passed a green sign that said the next town was 30 miles away. I fixated on that. 30 miles. That's not too far. I told myself I'd reach a well-lit area soon. There would be people. There would be a diner or something. I repeated that in my head. 30 miles, then lights, then people. The shape moved again. I felt something brush against my right shoulder. It was faint, like a piece of cloth. I jerked the wheel, and the car swerved. My tires squealed for a moment. My heart hammered. I forced the car back into the lane, panting and glancing around. That presence was still there. I spoke again, louder this time. Leave me alone. I'm not stopping. I can't help you. I didn't know why I said that. It just came out. I thought about pulling over and jumping out of the car, but the idea of stopping in the middle of nowhere with that thing still around made my stomach twist. I'd rather keep driving. I pressed my foot down, and the speedometer climbed higher. The engine roared, and the road whipped by faster. The whine of the wind outside got louder. I hoped I wouldn't see it again, but it kept appearing at the edge of my vision, flickering in the mirror, leaning in, trying to get closer. After a few minutes, I saw a faint glow in the distance. It might have been a rest stop or a small town. I felt a surge of relief. I let my speed drop a bit, not wanting to blow past it. As I approached, I saw it was one of those small 24-hour gas stations with a bright canopy over the pumps. The place looked old, but the lights were on. There was a single pickup truck parked at one of the pumps. I took the exit ramp and parked in front of the convenience store section. I switched off the engine, breathing heavily. My entire body shook with adrenaline. I looked around. The store's glass doors were lit up, and I could see a bored-looking clerk inside, leaning on the counter. The overhead fluorescence buzzed. I didn't see any sign of that figure in the reflection of my side mirror. Maybe it didn't like the lights. I inhaled, then exhaled, then undid my seatbelt. When I opened the driver's door, I felt a rush of cool air. It helped me steady my nerves a bit. I stood outside, shut the door, and stared at the interior through the window. The seats were empty, just as I expected. No shadows, no shapes. I grabbed my wallet and walked to the store. The clerk glanced up at me and nodded. I nodded back, trying to act normal. My hands were still shaking, so I stuffed them in my pockets. The clerk asked if I needed help. I asked if I could use the restroom. He said it was around the back of the building, and he handed me a key attached to a plastic tag. Outside, I walked around the side of the building, scanning the darkness. The lights from the store cast a weak glow on the concrete, but a few steps beyond that, it was pitch black. The restroom door was under a single flickering bulb. I unlocked it, went inside, and locked it behind me. The air smelled like disinfectant. The light was dull, but at least I could see myself in the mirror. I looked at my own eyes and saw how wide they were. I turned on the faucet, let the water run cold, and splashed my face. I felt each splash. It woke me up. I stood there for a while, breathing in and out, trying to slow my heart rate. Then I heard a soft scraping sound from outside the restroom door. It was light, like someone was dragging their feet on the concrete. My chest felt tight. I stayed quiet, listening. Another scrape, then silence. I tightened my jaw and tried not to panic. I reached for the doorknob, hesitated, then cracked it open. I looked out. The bulb was still flickering. I didn't see anyone. I walked back around to the front, and I kept looking over my shoulder. The gas station lot was empty. The pickup truck was gone. The clerk was still behind the counter messing with his phone. I handed him the key, picked up a bottle of cold water from a nearby fridge, and placed it on the counter. He scanned it, and I paid in cash. I opened the bottle right there and took a long drink. My throat felt dry and sore. He asked if I was on a long drive. I said yeah, a few hours left. He told me to be careful. Then he paused, gave me a curious look, and asked if I was all right. I guess I looked terrified. I told him I was fine, just tired. I stepped back outside. When I got to my car, I stood there for a moment, staring into the back seat again. Everything looked normal. I circled around and checked the trunk, even though I knew that made no sense. It was locked. I opened the driver's door, slid in, and slammed it shut. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed, then started. I sat there, letting it idle, listening to the rumble. The overhead lights at the station felt comforting, but I knew I had to keep going. I pulled out of the gas station lot and back onto the road. For the first few minutes, things seemed calm. I finished half of my water bottle and placed it in the cup holder. The clock on my dashboard said it was 3:15 a.m. If I kept my pace, I'd be at my destination by sunrise. The adrenaline had worn off a bit, and I felt a dull ache in my head. I thought maybe everything was done, maybe that presence was gone. Then, out of habit, I glanced at the rearview mirror. My stomach dropped when I saw the pale figure again. It was crouched on the back seat, leaning over the center console. I thought I saw its hand brushing against the seatbelt buckle on the passenger side. I shouted and stomped on the brakes without thinking. My car jerked, and the seatbelt locked. The tires screeched. My phone slid off the passenger seat and hit the floor. I forced myself to look at the back seat directly. Nothing there. I looked in the mirror again. The pale shape faded out. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my neck. The lights from the gas station were behind me, getting smaller. I realized I was in darkness again. The open road stretched out, and I didn't see any headlights in either direction. I inched forward, driving slower now, scanning the mirror and the road. The figure was gone for the moment, but I knew it would appear again. My arms felt weak. My hands were stiff from gripping the wheel so hard. My breath was shallow, and I kept swallowing, but my throat still felt tight. I whispered, "I'm not stopping, you're not getting in." My voice sounded small. I tried to focus on the lines on the road. I tried to block out everything else. But after a couple of miles, I felt a pressure in the passenger seat next to me, like someone sinking into the cushion. It was a small movement, but I noticed it. My eyes darted to the seat. It looked normal, but the seatbelt strap twitched. It moved against the seat. My pulse hammered. I drove on like that for miles, feeling a presence I couldn't see, catching glimpses in the mirror, hearing faint shifts in the back seat. My skin tingled every time. I kept the speed steady, hoping to reach a bigger highway or a well-lit town. Each mile felt longer than the last. The presence never spoke, never made a clear sound, but it pushed in on me, made the air feel heavy, like I could barely breathe. Finally, I saw headlights far ahead. The road began to widen. Streetlights appeared, and I passed a sign for the next city. Buildings rose on the horizon, and I could see the glow of a larger town coming up. As soon as the lights lit my interior, the car felt different. I glanced at the passenger seat. It was empty, and I didn't feel that pressure anymore. I checked the mirror. The back seat was empty. My arms loosened up, and I took a shaky breath. I kept driving until I was surrounded by the lights of the city. Cars passed by. I ended up at a stoplight near a row of closed shops. I realized my entire body was trembling. My phone buzzed from the floor, and I reached down to pick it up. No new messages, just a low battery warning. I looked around. People were walking on the sidewalks. I felt relief, like I was finally back in normal life. But as I took a left turn at the light, I glanced at the rearview mirror out of habit. I spotted something white at the far edge of the reflection, like a face pressed against the back window. It vanished in an instant. I nearly swerved, but I stayed in my lane. My mouth felt dry again, and I tasted fear at the back of my throat. I wondered if it would ever really leave me. I kept driving, that's all I could do. I froze the first time I heard a rustling noise behind me that night. I stood still, tried to swallow, and felt my throat tighten. My flashlight shook in my hand, and I realized my body was already reacting before my mind caught up. That was the moment I understood I had walked into something I didn't fully grasp. I wasn't just in a forest. I was in a place that seemed to watch me. I decided to go on this night hike because I always enjoyed places without crowds. I liked hearing my own footsteps and the natural sounds around me. I'd done a few daytime hikes in different spots around the area, but I wanted a new experience. So I drove out to an old trail I found on a local map. I parked my car on a dirt shoulder near the entrance. There were no signs or lights, just a gap in a row of thick pines. I locked my car and stepped onto the path. At first, I felt calm. My boots crunched the dirt and leaves underfoot. I heard a soft breeze through the branches. Occasionally, I smelled damp earth. The air felt cold and made my breath come out in short puffs. I glanced around to get familiar with the shapes of the trees. Some were tall and narrow. Others looked warped, with twisted branches that curved outward. After a while, I noticed a hazy fog settling in, which softened the glow of my flashlight. I kept walking. The path was uneven, and I had to watch my step to avoid tripping on roots. My flashlight revealed patches of moss and a few scattered rocks. Every now and then, I heard a small animal scamper away through the undergrowth. I tried not to let it bother me, but my nerves grew more sensitive with each minute. The fog got thicker, and the beam of my flashlight turned weaker as it hit the dense air. I tried not to think about how alone I was. There was no cell signal. I had no companion. It was just me, the trees, the fog, and the occasional sound in the distance. As I moved deeper, the path seemed to narrow. The trunks on either side felt closer than before. My arms brushed against damp branches. After a half hour or so, I paused and listened. I heard nothing at first, just a soft whistling breeze. Then I caught a faint noise like a low whisper from somewhere up ahead. I thought it was the wind, but it sounded too deliberate. I aimed my flashlight at the trees. I saw the outline of twisted limbs, but no sign of a person or an animal. The whisper died out. My gut told me to turn around, but I felt stubborn. I had come this far, and I didn't want to scare myself over random sounds. I took a few more steps. The ground felt uneven. My boots sank into a layer of wet leaves. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. As I continued, I caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. I would turn, and the shapes would vanish. Sometimes they looked like hunched figures behind a tree. Other times they seemed to slip between the branches above. My pulse beat hard in my chest. I forced myself to take slow, measured breaths. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't ignore that I kept seeing something. I heard a branch crack off to my right. I spun and aimed the flashlight. I only saw more gray fog and overlapping trunks. My heart pounded. My back tingled with a wave of adrenaline. I mumbled under my breath that I needed to calm down. I started to question whether I should keep going or turn back. I checked my watch and realized I had already been out there for almost an hour. I hadn't found a clearing, and the path seemed to get tighter and darker with every step. Still, I couldn't stand still for long. The quiet around me felt suffocating. The sudden shapes in the distance and the weird whispers made me uneasy. I decided to push forward in hopes of finding another way out. Maybe the trail looped around. My legs shook slightly, but I forced myself to move. My flashlight shone on the gnarled branches overhead. They crisscrossed and formed odd patterns that looked like contorted faces. I felt like they were looming down at me. The deeper I went, the more the wind changed. It no longer sounded gentle. It took on a strange moaning tone that rose and fell through the trees. I tasted a metallic edge in the air. Each time the wind kicked up, I felt a chill across my neck. My skin broke out in goosebumps. I tried to ignore it, but it kept building. My eyes darted around, following each swirl of fog and each rustle of brush. After a while, I heard my name in a breathy voice. It sounded soft, almost like it came from right behind me. I spun around so fast my flashlight beam shook violently. My throat tightened. I called out in a loud voice, "Who's there?" No one answered. I listened for footsteps, for any sign of another person. There was nothing. Just more wind and that strange hush in the distance. My stomach knotted. The idea that something in this forest knew my name made my chest feel heavy. I kept my flashlight pointed behind me for a moment, then slowly turned it forward again. I told myself it was just the wind messing with my head, but I couldn't convince myself. I remembered how the silhouettes had appeared whenever I wasn't looking directly at them. It felt like the entire place was alive in a way I didn't like. Every few steps, I caught a glimpse of those shapes shifting between the trees. They stayed out of the direct flashlight beam, but I was sure they were there. My breathing became rough. My tongue felt dry. My thoughts raced, and I started to imagine possibilities. Maybe these shapes were animals, or maybe local people messing with me. But something about their movement seemed unnatural. They glided too smoothly, and they disappeared too quickly. I noticed a pattern. Each time I shone my light around, I saw nothing. The moment I turned away, I got a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. The path under my feet turned slippery with wet leaves. I had to slow down to avoid falling. My knees felt shaky. My mouth tasted bitter with fear. I tried to focus on each step. Left foot, right foot. Watch for roots and rocks. I heard more whispers, some behind me, some ahead. They seemed to call my name in different tones. Sometimes it was an urgent hiss, sometimes a slow, drawn-out murmur. Each time it sent a jolt through my chest. My flashlight flickered for a second. I tapped it, and it stayed on. But the beam looked weaker than before. I realized I hadn't changed the batteries before leaving. That realization made me panic. The idea of losing light in that place felt unbearable. I clenched the flashlight harder. I forced myself to keep moving. I didn't want to stand still and wait for the battery to die. As I rounded a bend in the path, I saw something step behind a tree. I paused immediately. My thighs burned from the sudden stop. My heart hammered in my rib cage, and I stared at the spot. I only caught the edge of a dark shape. It vanished behind the trunk too quickly. I aimed my flashlight at that tree, stood there, and waited. No movement. I had a strong urge to call out again, but I stayed quiet this time. My breath came out in short bursts. I felt the hair on my arms standing on end. I decided to keep going. My mind screamed for me to get out, but I didn't know if heading forward or backward was better. The path was narrower now, like the trees had closed in. Branches scratched at my jacket. I felt bark scrape against my sides. I stopped caring about the mud on my pants. My only goal was to find a spot where the trees opened up. I wanted to see more than a few feet ahead. I wanted some sense that I wasn't trapped. As I pushed past a cluster of overlapping branches, a gust of wind hit me so hard that I staggered. The wind carried a low, throaty moan. My ears rang from the sound. I heard leaves rustling overhead, and a few drops of water fell on my face. The air smelled sour. My eyes stung for a moment. I coughed. Then I heard my name again, whispered from several directions at once. I felt my chest tighten in panic. I started to jog. My flashlight bounced in my hand. The beam jerked around in front of me, but I didn't care if I stumbled. I felt like I needed to move faster. My breathing grew ragged. I felt sweat trickling down the sides of my face, and my mouth went drier with each second. My footsteps echoed in the silence. I heard branches snapping behind me, like something big was pushing through them. My mind raced with the thought that I wasn't alone. Then I tripped on a root. I hit the ground hard, and my flashlight rolled out of my hand. I gasped as pain shot up my knee. I crawled toward the flashlight. It flickered, and my heart nearly stopped. I grabbed it and tapped it. The light held steady, but it looked even dimmer than before. I pushed myself up, ignoring the throb in my leg. My hands trembled as I wiped the dirt from my palms. I stood there, shining the weak beam around me. The silhouettes were everywhere now, slipping behind trunks and branches, peering out for a split second, then vanishing. Each time I saw one, my stomach flipped. I couldn't make out faces, only outlines. It felt like they were circling me. My instinct told me they were not human, or at least not friendly. A wave of nausea rolled through me. My breath shook. I thought about calling for help, but I doubted anyone else was around. I forced myself to keep moving. My legs stung with each step, but I had no other choice. The trail looked more like a thin gap between overlapping tree trunks. The fog pressed in around me. My flashlight illuminated only a few feet ahead now. I almost lost hope. Then I spotted a small break in the trees. I felt a surge of relief. I rushed toward it, ignoring the branches that scraped my arms. When I reached that break, I realized it led to a slight slope down. I saw a faint glow through the fog. It might have been moonlight or the reflection of something else. I didn't question it. I stumbled forward. As I went downhill, the silhouette seemed to follow me. I could hear leaves and twigs snap behind me. My head pounded, my lungs burned. My entire body felt tense. I kept my eyes on the faint glow. My flashlight flickered again. I tapped it, begging it not to die on me. My nerves felt raw, and my heart felt like it would burst from my chest. The whispers didn't stop. They kept repeating my name, sometimes close to my ear, sometimes far away like echoes. My shoulders tensed each time I heard it. My stomach churned. My legs were shaky, but I pushed on. Finally, the slope leveled out, and I saw what looked like a narrow opening in the woods. The trees were spaced a bit farther apart. I pressed myself between them, scraping my jacket. Once I passed through, I spotted a thin path of grass that stretched out to a small patch of flat ground. The glow I had seen was coming from a break in the canopy that revealed part of the night sky. I didn't see silhouettes in that spot. The whispers faded. I stepped onto the grass, feeling it crush under my boots. My breath slowed slightly, but my body still trembled. I looked around and saw a faint outline of a hillside. I realized I wasn't near the road where I started, but at least I wasn't hemmed in by dense trees. The forest behind me felt heavy, like it was waiting. The wind still carried that moaning sound, but it was weaker. I spotted what might have been a faint trail heading away to the side. I wasn't sure, but I needed to pick a direction and move. I remembered the shapes and the whispering. My hand hurt from gripping the flashlight so hard. My knee throbbed from the fall. I took a few careful steps toward that possible trail. I heard a slight rustling behind me, but I didn't look back. My only thought was to get distance between me and that strange part of the woods. As I left the opening, I realized I had survived the thickest section of that place. My mind stayed on edge, though, waiting for more sounds or for something to grab me. The forest in front of me was still dark, but it wasn't as cramped. The trees looked more normal. I heard a small stream trickling somewhere close. My flashlight flickered again, so I tried to hurry. It took another hour of careful walking before I recognized the faint outline of a dirt road in the distance. My legs ached. My breathing felt uneven. My scalp tingled with every slight sound. I heard a bird call at one point and nearly jumped out of my skin. When I finally stepped onto the dirt road, I saw the reflection of my car's side mirror about 30 yards ahead. I can't describe how much tension left my body at that moment. My knees nearly gave out. My flashlight died right then, as if it had been holding on until I was safe. I reached my car and leaned against it for a minute, wiping sweat from my face. My heart still pounded, and my palms were damp. My lungs felt starved for calm air. I took out my keys with shaky fingers and unlocked the door. The dome light comforted me. I sank into the driver's seat and slammed the door. As I turned the ignition, I couldn't stop looking at the trail entrance in my rearview mirror. Even though I was out, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching. My mind replayed the silhouettes, the whispering, and the twisted branches. I rubbed my sore knee, letting out a shaky breath. Then I put the car in gear and pulled away from that dirt shoulder. The headlights lit up the road and I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see something behind me. There was nothing, only darkness. As I drove home, I tried to steady my breathing and clear my thoughts. My throat felt sore from all the shallow breathing. My skin tingled like I had been exposed to something hostile. I just wanted a warm shower and the familiar smell of my apartment. I wanted to feel my own locked door behind me. When I got home, I turned on every light in my place. I dropped my gear by the door, kicked off my muddy boots, and sat on the couch. My hands were still shaking. It took me a while to feel safe. But my mind kept wandering back to that fog, those silhouettes, and the voices calling my name. I still don't know what was out there or what purpose it had. All I know is that I felt like the whole forest was alive and it wanted me to stay. I'm glad I left when I did, and I won't be going back. I didn't think an old armchair could change the entire atmosphere of my living room, but here I am, staring at it like it's about to spring to life. This started the day I brought it home from an antique store. The man who sold it to me looked uncomfortable. He wrapped up the transaction fast. He barely met my eyes and he rushed me out with a weak smile. I saw relief in his face when I left. At the time, I assumed he was just eager to close the sale, but now I wonder what he knew. I'm a straightforward guy. I don't usually read too much into these things. I bought the armchair because I needed new furniture, and I wanted something with a bit of history. I rearranged my living room after I got rid of my old couch. I placed the armchair near the window where the sunlight hits in the afternoon. It's a sturdy piece of furniture, made of dark wood with carved armrests. The upholstery looked a little faded. There was a musty smell clinging to it, but I figured some fabric cleaner would solve that. The first time I sat down on that armchair, I felt it sink in more than I expected. My stomach lurched, like I had missed a step going downstairs. I remember planting my feet on the floor to steady myself. The cushion felt too soft in the middle, like something was giving way under me. But I checked later, and the wood frame seemed solid. There wasn't any visible damage. I just shrugged it off. The next few days felt normal, except for a strange tension in the living room. I'd walk in, and the armchair would catch my eye. I caught myself staring at it for no reason, feeling a weird flutter in my chest. I told myself I was overthinking. It's just an old piece of furniture. It had a small stain on one side, like a spill that never got cleaned properly. The wood was chipped along one leg. Nothing out of the ordinary for something from an antique store. Within a week, though, I noticed something that made me uneasy. I was about to sit on the armchair when I saw faint impressions on the seat. They looked like someone had just been sitting there. It wasn't just one area either. It was shaped almost like a body had pressed down on the cushion. I hovered my hand above it. The spot felt warm, like it was recently in use. I checked the room. My apartment was empty. I live alone. I didn't have any visitors that day. Still, the cushion looked pressed down, and that sight made the hair on my arms rise. I walked around the armchair thinking I must have left it like that myself. But I remembered sitting on the couch across the room all morning using my laptop. I don't like that feeling of confusion, so I tried to move on. I told myself it was just old furniture that sags in weird ways. I sat down again, tested the cushion, felt it sink under my weight. My legs tensed up. My hands gripped the armrests. The old wood made a soft creaking sound like a whisper. It wasn't like normal wood creaks, it almost sounded like an inhale, but that's probably just my imagination. A few more days passed. The musty smell of the armchair started getting stronger. I'm not big on cleaning supplies, but I sprayed a deodorizer on the fabric and opened the window. The smell had a sour edge to it. Underneath that, I noticed a faint perfume. It reminded me of something old-fashioned, like the kind of scent older relatives used to wear, but I couldn't place it exactly. At night, I'd walk into the living room, and the smell would be thick in the air. I left the window open sometimes, just to keep it from turning stale. Then the sound started. Late at night, when I was reading or browsing on my phone, I'd hear small shifts. Wood expanding is normal, but these noises had a pattern. They'd happen when I glanced at the armchair, almost like it responded to my attention. I'd look over and I'd see the fabric move. Just a slight ripple, like someone shifting their weight. I'd stand up slowly, my pulse pounding. I'd approach the armchair, hold my breath, and press my hand down. The upholstery felt empty and still. One night, I had a hard time sleeping. I got up to get a glass of water from the kitchen. As I walked back through the living room, I stopped in my tracks. I could smell that mix of mold and perfume. It was so strong I covered my nose with my hand. Then I heard a faint sound like a quiet click or pop. I turned to face the armchair. The wooden parts creaked again, this time louder. It felt like a warning. I felt my forehead break out in a sweat. My skin tingled. I wanted to turn on more lights, but I also didn't want to draw attention to myself. I don't know why I felt that way. It's my own apartment, yet I felt like an intruder. The next morning, I decided I'd move the armchair to the spare room until I figured out what to do. I tried to drag it across the floor. As soon as I gripped the sides and pulled, I heard sharp, cracking noises. The wood seemed to resist. It wasn't just the typical scrape of furniture against the floor. It was louder, almost hostile. My heart rate shot up. I paused, took a few breaths, and tried again. The armchair budged a little, but the frame groaned. My arms felt shaky. My muscles tensed up. When I finally got it a few feet from its spot, I stopped to catch my breath. I realized I was sweating, and my hands were trembling. My mind was racing with the thought, this thing doesn't want to move. It sounded ridiculous, but that's exactly how it felt. I stared at the seat, and for a split second I felt like there were eyes on me. My face grew hot. My mouth felt dry. I had to walk away. I left the armchair there, half turned, a few feet from the window. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. I needed fresh air. When I came back later, the armchair was in the same position. I felt like I was walking into a standoff. The living room felt colder. I tried to focus on other tasks. I did some laundry, paid a few bills, scrolled through social media. But every time I passed the living room door, I caught that musty smell and had a tight feeling in my chest. Over the next few days, I caught glimpses of those pressure marks on the cushion again. Sometimes I'd wake up in the morning, go to the kitchen, and glance at the armchair. The seat would be depressed, like someone was sitting or had just stood up. My stomach would churn. I'd touch the cushion. It would feel normal after a few seconds, but sometimes I thought it was warm. That's when I started losing sleep. I began leaving the lights on in the living room overnight, just to see if anything changed. The smell didn't go away. The marks didn't stop. The creeping sounds kept happening. One evening, I was watching TV and trying to ignore the armchair. I had turned it around so it faced the corner. My thought was that if I couldn't see the seat, I wouldn't get freaked out by it. But that made it worse. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced that something was behind me. My neck felt tight. My breathing was shallow. I couldn't concentrate on the show. I eventually shut off the TV and just stared at the back of the armchair. Then I heard a distinct thud. It wasn't the typical wood creak. It sounded like a heavy shift, like someone dropping their weight into the seat. My heart hammered in my chest. I leaned forward. My hands were shaking. I didn't want to check, but I felt like I had to. I stood up, walked around the armchair, and saw the cushion pressed down again. It was deep, the way it would look if a full-grown person was sitting there. I could hardly breathe. I touched the cushion gently. It felt firm, but the shape stayed for a moment, then slowly rose back up like memory foam. Except it's not memory foam. It's an old cushion. I backed away, stumbled over the edge of the rug, and almost fell. I grabbed the armrest to steady myself. That's when I felt something faint. It was like a vibration or a tremor under my hand, like a heartbeat. I jerked my hand away, my pulse racing. I was afraid I'd lost my mind. I stood there for a moment, staring at the armrest. I felt trapped in my own living room. Every time I tried to rationalize it, something else happened. The perfume got stronger, or the cushion sank, or the wood creaked. My hands started feeling clammy whenever I got near the thing. My stomach tied itself in knots. I was eating less because I felt nauseous. I even started sleeping with my door locked. It was pointless, but it gave me a small sense of control. I called a friend and tried to explain. I ended up sounding ridiculous, so I downplayed it. I said I was having some strange vibes with a piece of old furniture. He laughed and said I should get rid of it if it bothered me that much. I told him I would. I promised I'd haul it out or drop it off at some charity. But deep down, I wasn't sure it would be that easy. The armchair felt anchored to that spot. A couple of nights later, I was determined to move it to the sidewalk. I wanted to be done with it. I put on gloves because I didn't like touching the worn wood. I grabbed the sides and pulled. It resisted again, making loud, sharp cracks that sounded like snapping bones. I tensed up. My arms shook. I kept dragging it inch by inch towards the doorway. The perfume smell filled my nostrils. My eyes watered. I coughed, feeling like I was inhaling dust or mold. I got the armchair close to the door, but then it got stuck. I tried angling it, pushing from the back, pulling from the front. The door frame was wide enough, but the wood kept grinding and creaking like it was alive. I felt a jolt in my arms, almost as if the chair was pulling back. I let go and stumbled backward. My heart thumped in my ears. I stood there, breathing hard, unable to shake the feeling that I was fighting with something that wasn't just wood and fabric. That night, I gave up. I left the armchair by the door and went to my bedroom. I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing it sliding back to the original spot on its own. In the morning, I woke up, tiptoed to the living room, and felt a rush of relief when I saw it still there, halfway out of place. The relief didn't last. I still couldn't bring myself to haul it out. I had work, errands, and the thought of wrestling with it again set my nerves on edge. Now, I sit here, writing this down, trying to explain it in plain words. The armchair is back near the window because I moved it again out of habit. I've stopped trying to rationalize. The seat looks deflated, like someone's sitting there even though I'm across the room. My hands are sweating just looking at it. I smell that musty odor, mixed with something sweet and stale. My eyes are watering and my stomach is twisting. I can't see anything there, but I feel watched. My neck feels prickly, and my skin is cold. Every time I look at the armchair, it looks back. I don't have a better way to explain that. I feel it. My chest feels tight, and there's a dull ache behind my rib cage, like I'm bracing for something to jump out at me. I've tried telling myself it's all in my head, but my body reacts on its own. My pulse speeds up and my breathing gets shallow. I haven't called the antique store owner again. I'm not sure what I'd say. You sold me a haunted armchair. It sounds insane, but I see how he looked so relieved when I bought it. I think he knew. Maybe he didn't have a choice, or maybe he just wanted to pass this problem to someone else. Now it's mine. I haven't decided what I'll do next. Sometimes I consider calling a junk removal service and letting them deal with it. Then I picture them showing up, grabbing the armchair and struggling like I did. I picture their confused faces, the creaks and cracks, the smell that follows. I wonder if it would even leave the apartment. The idea of fighting it again makes me sweat. Right now I'm just trying to keep my distance. It's across the room, but I feel like it's closer than that. My nerves are frayed and my head is pounding. I hear a noise from the armchair's direction, a soft groan. I clench my teeth. I refuse to go near it tonight. I'm done trying to prove anything to myself. I'm just waiting, but I'm not sure what I'm waiting for. I haven't told anyone the full story. I can't handle the thought of them laughing at me. So I go on with my day, ignoring the tension in my gut. Every night, though, I'm aware of that seat, that invisible weight, those creaks. The feeling of being watched never goes away. It's like living with a constant chill. I'm jumpy. I flinch at small sounds, and I don't even like to turn the lights off. That's how it stands for now. I bought a used armchair, and my life changed in ways I never anticipated. I don't know how to get rid of it, and I'm not sure if there's something attached to it. All I know is that I feel trapped in my own home, with a piece of furniture that shouldn't be able to make me feel this way. Every time I look at it, I sense a presence. I can't prove it, but I feel it in my bones. And I regret the day I went to that antique store. I regret wanting something with history, because now I can't escape whatever came with it. I still remember the moment I first saw that iron candelabrum on the auction table. It had 4 arms, each one ending in a shallow cup for a candle. There were small, circular patterns on the metal that looked like eyes. They were spaced at intervals along each arm. They weren't large or obvious, but they drew my attention right away. I felt a strange pull toward the piece. I was looking for something unique, something to place on my living room table to spark conversation. That candelabrum felt like it had some kind of background nobody else knew about. It looked used, and the metal had dents and scratches. There was nothing delicate about it. It was just heavy iron with some rough carvings. I raised my number without much hesitation and made the winning bid. I drove home and placed it on a small side table in my living room, not thinking much about it beyond its odd design. I live alone in a 1-story house with small windows and thick curtains. The living room is near the front door with my sofa in the center facing a TV. The candelabrum sat on a side table to the left of the sofa. I remember that first evening well. I brought it inside, set it down, and inspected it under the overhead light. The metal was cold. When I ran my fingers over the carved circles, I could feel slight ridges that formed the outlines of eyelids and pupils. The lines were shallow but precise. I turned it around a few times, then shrugged and went about my evening routine. I made some dinner and watched a few old shows. Around 10, I decided to try it out by lighting some candles. I found a half-empty box of long white candles in a kitchen drawer. I placed a candle in each holder, lit them, and then sat back on my couch. At first, I just liked the soft glow. The house felt quieter with candles burning. I turned off the overhead light so the only light source was the candelabrum. The flames looked calm. They seemed to flicker in a pattern that wasn't random, but I figured it was the airflow in the room. Then I started to notice how the flames grew and shrank together, almost like they were moving in unison. I leaned forward and watched more closely. I didn't see any drafts. The curtains were still, and the windows were shut. Yet the flames danced in a way that felt synchronized. I watched for at least 5 minutes, and I got this odd, tense feeling. My stomach felt tight. I could feel an uncomfortable warmth in my chest, but I still tried to shake it off. I stood up to get a glass of water from the kitchen. While I moved across the room, the flames shifted in a slow arc. I stopped halfway to the kitchen and faced the candelabrum. The flames seemed to point toward me. It was subtle, but it was noticeable enough that I stared for a few seconds. There was no breeze, no ceiling fan, no open door. I took a couple more steps and watched. The flames moved again, following me. My arms broke out in goosebumps. The back of my neck felt tight. I drank my water faster than usual and went back to the living room. I told myself it was just an illusion caused by my movement or some shift in air. I sat down again, and the flames returned to a more upright position. After a few minutes, I was still on edge, but I tried to brush it off. I got up to blow out the candles so I could go to bed. Right when I leaned in, I heard a sharp click in the iron. It sounded like metal expanding under heat or contracting under cool air, but it was too deliberate. It repeated a few times. They were short, crisp clicks. I paused and listened, and it stopped. My heart was beating fast. I didn't feel comfortable turning my back on it. My shoulders felt tense, and my breathing got shallow. I stared at the carved eyes. They looked like they were carved to stare in different directions. I leaned in again. Before I could blow out a single flame, I heard a final click. It sounded like a quick protest. My stomach dropped. I considered leaving the candles lit overnight, but I didn't want a fire hazard in my house. I blew them out, placed the candelabrum down on a different corner of the table, and quickly went to my bedroom. I went to sleep that night telling myself I was overthinking. In the morning, I felt more level-headed. The candelabrum was still there on the side table, looking the same as always. I touched it and felt it was cool to the touch again. It left a bit of a black residue on my fingers like some old soot. I wiped my hands on a tissue. I decided I wouldn't light it again for a while. I convinced myself that maybe it was just an odd item, and I was letting my imagination run. I spent most of that day at work. When I came home, I debated moving the candelabrum to my garage or maybe a closet. Instead, I left it there, mostly out of laziness. Around 9 at night, I settled into the couch to read something on my tablet. The living room felt dim, so I turned on a lamp. The candelabrum caught my eye again. I felt drawn to light it, so I grabbed some fresh candles I had bought earlier. I lit all 4. Right away, I noticed the same pattern. The flames flickered in a synchronized manner. I got a tight feeling in my chest again. I heard small pops in the wax, not unusual for candles, but these pops felt spaced out in a strange pattern. I tried to ignore it and went back to reading. I glanced up a few times and caught the flames moving in my direction. Every time I shifted my position on the couch, the flames followed in slow arcs. When I leaned forward, they all leaned forward too. I felt my palms get clammy. My forehead got damp. I set my tablet aside and just watched them. I had no idea how to process what I was seeing. I got up and walked around the sofa. The flames turned with me. No breeze in the house, no fans, no open windows. The air felt stale. I heard my breathing grow louder in my own ears. I swallowed a few times because my mouth felt dry. The soft glow on the walls began forming faint shadows. I could see shapes on the paint. They weren't clear pictures, but they looked like faces with sunken cheeks or empty expressions. They weren't moving like real faces, but they were angled toward me. I felt my legs get shaky. I stood there, staring at the wall, trying to figure out if I was imagining details. The outlines stayed there. They changed slightly when the flames shifted. I rubbed my eyes and the shapes remained. My pulse was pounding. I considered putting the candelabrum in the yard. I went over and placed my hand around its base. It felt warm. The carved eyes were at eye level with me. I sensed a slight throb in my forehead. My heart rate felt out of control. I decided to put out the candles. I leaned in, and the metal made a little groaning sound. I froze. Then it made a few ticking sounds again. My throat felt tight. I blew out the first candle, and the flame died. I heard a metallic clink like a recoil. I blew out the rest and listened. I heard 3 more little clicks. I didn't say anything. I picked up the candelabrum, carried it to my garage, and set it on a shelf next to some old boxes. I looked at it under the fluorescent garage light for a few seconds, then turned away and went back inside. For the rest of the night, I kept checking my living room to make sure there was nothing out of place. I eventually fell asleep on the couch with my TV on, feeling uneasy. The next day, I told a coworker about the candelabrum. She said maybe I was just spooked by an antique and suggested I put it away or resell it. That evening, I went into the garage to get some tools, and I saw it there on the shelf. It looked normal. The carved eyes still seemed to stare at random points in the garage. I stood in front of it for a while, waiting to see if I felt anything. It was just metal. So I brought it back inside, thinking I would just keep it as a conversation piece, unlit. I set it in a corner of the living room floor. That night, while watching TV, I heard a soft noise behind me. It sounded like a faint clang of metal. I muted the TV. The room felt quiet. My eyes drifted toward that corner. The candelabrum was right where I left it. The air felt heavy. There was no movement, but I felt that same uncomfortable sensation in my stomach. I told myself it was my imagination, so I turned the TV's volume back on. After a few minutes, I heard another faint metal noise. This time, it was more like a click. I got up and approached the candelabrum. I didn't see anything move, but I felt tense. I put a hand on it. It wasn't warm. It was just cold iron. I moved it behind a small cabinet so I wouldn't see it from the couch. Then I sat back down. I heard nothing else that night. but I kept waking up every hour with the feeling that I wasn't alone. A few days went by. I didn't light the candelabrum at all. I tried to forget about it. Then I decided to do a thorough cleaning of my place over the weekend. While I was organizing the living room, I moved the cabinet and saw the candelabrum again. I can't explain why, but I felt drawn to see those flames again, as if I needed to confirm everything I experienced. It was midday, the sun was out, so I figured it wouldn't feel as creepy. I placed it on my coffee table, opened the curtains to let in plenty of natural light, and lit the 4 candles again. The flames behaved strangely, even in daylight. They kept a steady, synchronized sway. No open window, no air circulation. It didn't make any sense. I took a few steps to the left and the flames arched in that direction. My jaw tightened. I could taste bitterness in my mouth. I kept the candles lit for several minutes, watching the shapes they made on the walls. The face-like patterns were harder to see in the daylight, but I still saw hints of them in the corners of my vision. My palms got sweaty again. I decided to record a short video on my phone. I pressed record, walked around the candelabrum, and kept the camera on the flames. On my screen, they just looked like regular flickering candles. I couldn't see the same directional movement I noticed with my own eyes. I circled around it twice. In person, I saw the flames turning after me. On the screen, it looked normal. I stopped recording and replayed the video. Everything looked ordinary. My chest felt heavy. I considered calling someone, but I knew how it would sound. I didn't want people thinking I was jumping at shadows. I spent the next hour near the candelabrum, but I never got used to the feeling. My shoulders were tense. I took short breaths. I took the candles out and set them aside. I left the candelabrum on the coffee table. I figured maybe if I kept it in plain view, it would become more familiar, and I'd stop feeling so uneasy. That didn't happen. Every time I walked through the room, I had the sense that I was being watched. My skin would get prickly, and I'd move faster than usual to get wherever I was going. That night, around midnight, I got restless and decided to do one final test. I put the candles back in, lit them, and turned off all the other lights. The flames moved immediately, leaning in my direction. My ears felt hot. My lips felt dry. I paced around the living room and they followed me, one by one. I checked each holder to see if there was a slant or something, but they were stable. The shadows on the walls became more distinct again. They looked like faces with pained expressions all staring. I couldn't ignore it. The lines on their brows looked furrowed. Their eyes looked narrow. I didn't know how it was happening. I felt my hands shaking. I moved to blow out the flames and I heard the metal start making tiny pops and clicks. The noise was more pronounced this time. It reminded me of soft tapping. It paused every time I hesitated. I took a deep breath and blew out the flames one by one. With each extinguished candle, I heard a sharp click, like the candelabrum was pushing back. My heart pounded. When the last candle went out, the entire room went dark except for the faint light from outside. I stood there in the darkness, staring at the outline of the iron shape. I felt dizzy. I didn't feel safe leaving it in the house. I grabbed a pair of thick gloves and carried it to the garage. I placed it in a cardboard box. I taped the box shut. Then I stacked 2 heavier boxes on top of it. I left it there and backed away. My breath was shaky. My fingers were cold, and my mind was racing. I locked the garage door behind me and went back inside. I made sure every door was locked. Then I sat on my couch in silence, listening to see if I'd hear any more clicks or clangs from behind the garage door. The night stayed quiet, but I couldn't sleep. It's been a while since then. I haven't reopened that box. Some evenings, I hear a soft sound from the garage. It's always a short click or faint scraping noise. I keep telling myself it's just the metal contracting with temperature changes, but I know how that candelabrum behaves when the candles are lit. I still feel watched even when I'm in my living room far from the garage. My shoulders get tense at random times and my mind drifts to the shape of that iron piece and its carved eyes. Sometimes when the house is silent, I remember the way those flames followed me. I remember the tension in my chest and the dryness in my mouth. I tell myself I should get rid of it, but I haven't done it yet. Maybe I'm worried that if I take it somewhere, something will follow me back. For now, I'm just leaving it in that box, and I'm trying not to think about it. But I can't forget how those flames seemed aware of every move I made. I can't forget those faces on the wall. And I definitely can't forget the clicking sounds, echoing in the night whenever I got too close to blowing out those strange synchronized candles. I still remember the day I walked through that small curiosity market. I had gone there to look for a cheap side table or maybe an old lamp. I didn't plan on buying anything unusual, but I saw this black umbrella. It had silver embroidery on the fabric. The handle felt solid and the tip looked sharp. I picked it up and felt a slight chill. I didn't think much about it in that moment. I liked the way it looked, so I handed over some cash and took it home. I'm a quiet guy in my early 30s. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. I work in a local office handling accounts and paperwork. My place is small, with a living room that connects to a kitchen and a narrow hallway leading to my bedroom. A single bathroom sits at the end of that hallway. I keep the lights on most of the time because the apartment feels dim, even in the afternoon. I don't collect strange things, so that umbrella was my first real odd purchase in a while. The day I got home, I leaned the umbrella near the front door, standing it upright against the wall. I went about my evening. I heated up some leftover pasta, turned on the TV, and relaxed. At around 8 p.m., I decided to move the umbrella to the hall closet, but it wasn't where I had left it. I looked around the living room and I found it resting against the arm of my couch. I frowned. I didn't remember moving it. It didn't seem like a big deal. I assumed I'd picked it up without thinking. I stored it in my closet, propped between some coats, and I went on with my evening. I slept fine that night. The next morning, I left for work at around 7:30 a.m. When I got back at 6 p.m., I saw the umbrella in my living room. It was lying across my coffee table. My door was locked when I entered, and there's no spare key. I felt a small spike of unease. I walked up to the umbrella, lifted it, and checked it for damage. The fabric was smooth and the handle was still sturdy. I thought maybe I had forgotten to put it back in the closet that morning. It bothered me, but I tried to ignore it. Over the next few days, I kept finding that umbrella in different spots. I left it in the hallway, then I found it on the kitchen counter. I left it in the closet again, but then it appeared behind my couch. Sometimes I heard a light tap at night, like something hitting the floor or knocking against a wall. The first time I heard that, I got up and looked around. My apartment was quiet and I felt a tightness in my chest. I looked in every room. I found the umbrella on the floor near the bathroom door. It was closed, but the handle faced the hallway as though someone had tossed it there. My breathing got heavier because I knew I hadn't done that. I started to feel nervous. My palms got sweaty whenever I thought about that umbrella. I decided to do a small test. I took it to my bedroom. I placed it in a corner, leaning it carefully so it wouldn't slip. Then I closed my bedroom door. I stayed in the living room for a couple of hours, watching some late-night talk shows. Around midnight, I walked back to my bedroom. I paused outside the door and listened. The handle on the door felt cool against my palm. I opened it, turned on the light, and saw the umbrella resting on my bed. It was pointed toward the pillows. My heart rate spiked, and I felt goosebumps on my arms. I checked the windows. They were closed, and there was no sign of forced entry. I picked up the umbrella. The fabric was dry and smooth. I felt a low buzz of fear in my chest. I tried to think logically. Maybe I was sleepwalking or forgetting things, but it didn't make sense. I placed it back in the closet and shut the door. Then I dragged a small table in front of the closet door. I left the light on and went to bed. That night I woke up because I heard a rustling noise near my hallway. It was soft, like fabric brushing against a wall. My mind raced, but I didn't get out of bed. I stayed there, my heart pounding. I listened, but after a while I didn't hear anything else, so I eventually fell asleep again. The next morning I got up and walked toward the closet. The table was still in front of the door. I pushed it aside. The closet door was shut. I opened it and saw that the umbrella wasn't there. My head felt light and my hands shook. I took a step back. I checked the living room, the bathroom, and the kitchen. I couldn't find it. I felt relief for a moment. I thought maybe I had lost it somehow, even though that didn't make sense. Then I opened the front door to leave for work. I looked down and saw the umbrella leaning against the wall outside my apartment door. My heart seemed to skip a beat and I stared at it for a moment. Then I grabbed it, brought it back inside, and tossed it in the corner of my living room. At work, I felt on edge. My thoughts kept drifting to the umbrella. I had a tight feeling in my stomach. My shoulders felt stiff, and I snapped at a coworker when he asked me a routine question. I muttered an apology, but I didn't explain why I was upset. I just wanted to get through the day. When I finally got home, it was around 7 p.m. I opened the door slowly and glanced inside. I half expected to see the umbrella right there, but it wasn't. I stepped in, turned on the lights, and saw it near my couch. It was upright, leaning perfectly straight. I still felt fear, but I also felt a little anger. I said out loud, "Stay there." My voice shook. I felt foolish, but I was losing my patience. I grabbed a roll of duct tape and decided to wrap the umbrella shut. I bound the canopy so it wouldn't open. I wound the tape around it several times and left it on the floor. I watched some TV with the volume turned up, trying to drown out any noise. I stayed awake until around midnight. I kept checking the umbrella. It didn't move while I was watching. I finally turned off the lights and went to bed. I felt cold sweat on my forehead, and I locked my bedroom door. A loud tapping on my front door woke me around 3 a.m. It sounded firm, like someone using a stick to knock. My heart pounded as I sat up in bed. I listened for a moment. The tapping came again, more insistent. I thought maybe it was the umbrella hitting the inside of my door. I swung my legs off the bed, stood up, and felt my knees shake. I went to the door, keeping the lights off, and I placed my ear against it. The tapping continued. I took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and opened it. I saw the umbrella on the other side, still wrapped in duct tape. There were faint scratch marks on the door's surface just above the knob. I couldn't speak. I felt sweat drip down the side of my face. I grabbed it and pulled it inside. I shoved it into the closet, then I pushed a chair in front of the closet door. I felt wide awake and I paced around my apartment until sunrise. I went to work feeling exhausted. I kept imagining that sound in my head, the tapping at 3 a.m. It gave me chills. When I returned home, I found the closet door open, the chair moved to the middle of the living room, and the umbrella leaning next to it. I didn't see any rips in the duct tape, and it was still wound around the fabric. But the handle was tilted toward me as if inviting me to pick it up. I stared at it. My breathing got shallow. I paced around it, trying to understand how it had moved. Then I decided to just leave it and order takeout. I couldn't deal with it right then. That evening, a storm started outside. Heavy rain pounded against my windows, and I saw flashes of lightning. Thunder shook the walls. I lit a couple of lamps and tried to ignore the umbrella in the corner. The sound of the rain grew louder. Then I heard a thud near my front door. I walked over and saw the umbrella resting against the door, hitting it with a dull knock. It seemed to push at the door with every gust of wind. I felt my heart thudding in my chest. I stood there, frozen. Another flash of lightning lit up my living room. I exhaled and decided to open the door. I was tired of the feeling that I had no control. I stepped outside into the hallway. The umbrella was in my hand. I glanced back at my living room, then I closed the door. I rode the elevator down. My plan was to throw it in the dumpster behind the building. I reached the lobby, stepped outside, and got soaked by the downpour. My clothes stuck to my skin. The wind was cold, and I felt my teeth clench. I walked to the dumpster, lifted the lid, and held the umbrella over the opening. My arms shook. The wind picked up and tugged at the umbrella, even though it was still bound with tape. Then something in my gut made me stop. I felt an urge to open it, even with the tape. I fought that urge. I tossed the umbrella into the dumpster and let the lid slam shut. I stood there in the rain, breathing heavily. I looked around. The parking lot lights made everything look gray and wet. I heard the wind whistling in my ears. I felt some relief. My shoulders loosened a little. I walked back inside, water dripping from my jacket. I took the elevator up to my apartment. I unlocked the door and went in. I quickly changed into dry clothes and grabbed a towel. I sat on my couch and tried to steady my breathing. The storm kept raging outside. I kept imagining the umbrella crawling out of the dumpster, but I told myself that was impossible. A few hours later, close to midnight, I heard a hard knock on my door. I jumped up, adrenaline shooting through my chest. I stood still for a moment, hoping I had imagined it. Then the knock came again. The sound was loud and deliberate. I felt my pulse in my neck. I stepped to the door and opened it a crack. The hallway was empty. But I saw wet footprints on the floor coming from the elevator. My entire body felt tense. I stepped out into the hallway, and I followed the footprints. They ended right at my door, then vanished. I looked around, but saw no one. I walked back inside, locked the door, and turned the deadbolt. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the door handle. Then I sat on the couch and watched the door. The minutes passed slowly. The storm still raged outside. Lightning flashed through my windows. My hands kept twitching in my lap. I didn't want to go anywhere. I wanted to stay inside and wait for morning. Around 2 a.m., I heard a dragging noise in the hallway. My stomach tightened. I stood up, pressing my back against the wall next to the door. The dragging sound stopped at my door. Then I heard a gentle scrape against the wood. I whispered to myself, "No, no." I felt my arms trembling. I had left the umbrella in the dumpster, but I knew it was outside my door again. My mouth went dry. I stayed against the wall, listening. Another soft knock. I didn't open the door. I stayed quiet until it stopped. Then I waited more, counting the seconds. Eventually, I slumped onto the floor. I didn't sleep. When morning arrived, the storm had ended. The sky looked gray through my windows, but there was no more lightning or thunder. I unblocked my door and opened it slowly. My hallway was empty. The floor looked dry. No footprints. No umbrella. I walked to the elevator. I checked around the lobby and out in the parking lot. I didn't see any sign of it. I went to the dumpster. The lid was closed. I pushed it open and looked inside, leaning over the edge. It was filled with trash bags. I couldn't see the umbrella. I climbed down from the dumpster, wiped my hands on my jeans, and stared at the building. Everything seemed I never thought a painting could grab me by the throat and refuse to let go. The first time I saw it, I felt a chill across my shoulders. I was standing in my aunt's living room in a town I barely knew, staring at a package wrapped in old paper. She'd left it for me with a short note. It read, "From a distant cousin. I don't know anything else." That was it. I opened the package and found a dark landscape with dead trees and a purplish sky. It looked stiff at first, but something about it bothered me. I felt a strange tingle under my skin. That was my introduction to the painting that changed my life. I brought the painting home that same night. I live in a small apartment on the third floor of a brownstone building. There's a narrow hallway leading to my living room. I hung the painting there, thinking it would be out of the way. I didn't want to stare at it all the time, but I also felt curious. I can't explain why I hung it so quickly. Maybe I wanted to see if that odd feeling would come back. I remember flipping on the hallway light and checking the corners of the canvas. I didn't see any clues about who painted it. The frame felt cold to the touch, like metal left outside in winter. When I stepped back, I noticed that the scene had these skeletal trees with long, twisted branches. They pointed in all directions, almost like they were reaching for something. The sky wasn't just purple. It had this weird, murky quality. The clouds were thick and they seemed to have faint shapes embedded in them, but I couldn't make anything out. As I stood there staring, I heard a low moan. It wasn't loud. It sounded like wind passing through a crack under the door, but I'm certain it came from inside the painting. My chest tightened and my mouth went dry. I glanced around my hallway to check if I was hearing some plumbing noise or a breeze from a window, but everything was still. I didn't sleep well that night. I stayed up in my living room, flicking channels on the TV. My mind kept wandering back to the painting. At around midnight, I walked over to the hallway and turned on the light. The painting was there, silent. I leaned in to inspect it. The brush strokes looked normal. I put my ear close to the canvas. I didn't hear anything. My arms felt tense. My breathing was shallow. I flicked the light off and returned to the couch. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more than paint on that canvas. Over the next few days, I kept noticing details that I swear weren't there before. On the second day, I saw that one of the clouds had shifted to the right side of the sky. I compared it to my memory of the painting. It looked different. I stood there for a few minutes, tilting my head from side to side, trying to confirm if my eyes were playing tricks on me. The branches of the nearest tree appeared more bent than before, as if they had moved overnight. My stomach felt uneasy. My scalp tingled. I tried to rationalize it. I thought maybe I hadn't paid enough attention before, or maybe the lighting in my hallway changed how I viewed the painting. But deep down, I knew something was off. That evening, I found myself standing in front of the painting again. The hallway light cast a dull glow on the scene. I heard a quiet scraping sound. It was faint, like fingernails on fabric. I pressed my ear against the corner of the frame. The noise stopped. I thought about taking the painting down and storing it somewhere else, maybe in a closet or under my bed. But I hesitated. Part of me wanted to see where this was going. My palms felt sweaty. My heart pounded. I decided to wait it out. By the end of the week, I noticed more changes. The trees in the background seemed closer than before, and the purple clouds looked heavier. I walked up to the painting with a small flashlight. I ran the beam over the painted trees, looking for fresh paint or something that would indicate tampering. Nothing looked wet or altered in a physical sense. The surface of the painting felt normal. I tried to push down on the center of the canvas, but it was firm. I felt a faint vibration under my fingers like a pulse. It was so subtle that I wasn't sure if I was imagining it. At night, when the apartment was silent, I heard a soft voice. It said my name once, in a drawn-out tone. My blood went cold. I didn't move for a few seconds. My breath caught in my throat. The sound came from the hallway, right near the painting. I grabbed my phone and turned on its flashlight. I walked toward that stretch of wall. My footsteps felt heavy. My ears rang. The voice didn't repeat itself. I stared at the painting. The figures in the distance seemed blurry, as if the paint was shifting in front of me. My hands shook. My head felt light, and I had to steady myself against the wall. I considered throwing the painting away, but for some reason I couldn't bring myself to do it. I reasoned that it was an inheritance from a distant relative. I didn't know much about them, but I suspected there had to be some significance. I tried to ignore the painting for a few days. I stayed late at work, visited a friend, and came home only to sleep. But every time I came back, I could sense the painting in my hallway, as if it was watching me approach. I started walking faster past it, but I still felt its presence. I avoided looking at it directly for a while, but I never stopped hearing that low moan once in a while. One night, around 2 a.m, I woke up to the sound of my name being whispered again. My heart raced. My mouth felt dry. I got out of bed and went to the hallway, turning on all the lights. I saw something new in the painting. There was a faint glow around the base of the trees, like a strange fog. I leaned in. My eyes started to burn, and I felt my pupils dilate. The painting seemed to breathe. The surface pulsed slightly like a slow heartbeat. I reached out my hand, pressing my fingertips to the center of the canvas. The fabric felt warm. I jerked my hand back. I felt a soft shock, like static electricity, zip through my wrist and into my elbow. I stumbled backward, pressing myself against the opposite wall. My breathing was fast and shallow. I thought about calling someone, maybe a friend, but I didn't know what I'd say. I decided to do some research. I went to my computer, typed in keywords: dark landscape painting, moving paintings, haunted art, purple sky, anything I could think of. I came across various paranormal forums, but nothing matched exactly. I found a few stories about cursed items, but they sounded like urban legends. I started to sweat. My living room felt too hot. I opened a window for air. My nerves were on edge. The next day, I tried to go about my routine. I drank coffee, took a shower, and left for work. I work in an office with plain walls and standard desks. I stared at spreadsheets, but my mind stayed on the painting. I felt a headache coming on in the early afternoon. My coworker asked if I was okay. I lied and said it was just stress. By the time I drove home, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I didn't know what I would find in my hallway. I felt a cold sweat on the back of my neck. My stomach cramped with anxiety. I considered sleeping in my car, but that sounded ridiculous. When I opened the door to my apartment, I smelled something faint. It was like damp earth. I sniffed the air, then realized it was coming from the hallway. The painting seemed darker than before. The clouds had shifted even more, and the trees looked like they had grown in height. I stared at it for a few seconds, my heart thumping so hard I could hear it. I took a few steps forward. I saw movement in the lower portion of the painting. The fog or mist around the tree trunks was swirling. My hands clenched into fists. I exhaled slowly, walked to the closet, and grabbed a large sheet. I returned to the painting and threw the sheet over it. Then I walked away. I hoped that would at least help me ignore it. But even with the painting covered, I heard those sounds at night. The moan was louder and my name seemed clearer. It echoed in my head. I couldn't sleep well. I paced around my living room, forcing myself not to look at the hallway. My chest felt tight and my head throbbed. Around 3 a.m, I finally snapped. I marched over to the painting, ripped off the sheet, and stared at it. The sky in the scene was almost black now, with a swirl of purple near the horizon. The trees looked soaked, as if they were dripping something, but I couldn't see what. The entire painting had more depth, like the scene had a 3-dimensional quality. I inched closer. I saw shapes moving between the trunks, but they were too dim to identify. I heard my name again. It wasn't a scream. It was a whisper that floated from somewhere behind the canvas. My arms felt covered in goosebumps. My throat was dry. I could hardly swallow. I touched the frame and pulled the painting off the wall. I took it into my living room and propped it against my couch. I turned on every light in the room. I kneeled down in front of the painting, trying to figure out if there was a mechanical trick or hidden device. The back of the frame looked ordinary, just wood and a wire for hanging. I tapped it a few times. It sounded solid. I brushed my finger against the surface again. The material felt warm and alive. I recoiled. My wrist twitched. A wave of nausea passed through me. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I noticed my reflection. My eyes were bloodshot. My skin looked pale. I felt weak, and I hadn't been eating well for days. My mind raced with the idea that this thing was draining me. I didn't have proof, but I felt awful. I decided I needed a break from the apartment. I grabbed my keys and jacket and left, heading for a diner a few blocks away. Once there, I sat at a booth, ordered a coffee, and stared at my phone. My leg bounced under the table. I tried to calm down, but my thoughts kept racing. I pictured the painting waiting in my living room, shifting and calling me. After about an hour, I went back home. The hallways in my building were empty. Everything was quiet. I walked inside and saw the painting still against the couch. The colors looked less intense, almost as if it was resting. I felt strange relief. I set my keys on the kitchen table and turned on the TV for background noise. I sat across from the painting, watching it from the corner of my eye. Occasionally, I saw small changes in the brushstrokes, like the surface was rippling. I kept the lights on, afraid that if I turned them off, something worse would happen. In the following days, I tried to observe it without letting my imagination go wild. In daylight, The painting didn't look as threatening. The purple sky was still murky, and the trees were still twisted, but the movements were subtler. I stopped hearing the moan as often, but at night, it became more intense. The paint glowed faintly, and I heard whispers. They formed a pattern, almost like a melody. They repeated my name a few times, then faded. I caught myself answering out loud once, asking what it wanted. I immediately felt foolish. My neck muscles tensed. I felt trapped in my own home. One night I decided to confront it. I turned off the TV, lit a single lamp in the corner, and stared at the painting. I braced myself, breathing slowly. I approached the painting and touched its surface. It felt like pressing my palm against the hood of a car on a hot day. My skin tingled. I felt an odd sense of pulling, like gravity was heavier near the canvas. My head spun. I took my hand away and felt a static shock again. My heart pounded. I crouched down and looked straight at the largest tree. I saw movement in the branches. They swayed, and I heard the distant rustle of leaves even though they were painted dead and gray. My teeth clenched. My breathing was sharp. I wanted to tear the painting apart, but something held me back. I decided to leave my apartment and spend a few nights in a motel. I locked the door behind me and didn't look back. The first night away, I felt like a huge weight was gone. I slept for almost 10 hours. My body felt stiff in the morning, but my mind was clearer. I considered leaving the painting there forever, but I also worried about it. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was a doorway to something else. I wasn't sure if I was protecting myself or if I was abandoning the painting to grow stronger on its own. My nerves were raw. I spent most of the day pacing in the motel room, flipping through channels, ignoring calls from friends. Finally, I decided to go back. When I entered my apartment, the first thing I noticed was the stale air. The second thing was the painting. It had shifted to the left side of the living room wall. I hadn't placed it there. I had left it leaning against the couch. My pulse jumped. I slowly walked up to it. The scene looked the same, except the sky was almost entirely purple-black. The moan started again, a deep vibration that felt like it was echoing in my chest. I stepped back, holding my breath. Then I turned on all the lights, grabbed the painting from the sides, and put it face down on the floor. The moan faded, muffled. That's where things stand now. The painting is still in my apartment, face down on the floor. I can feel its energy through the wooden frame. Sometimes I hear it scraping against the floor, like it's trying to turn itself over. My anxiety is constant, but I'm trying to stay grounded by keeping busy. I avoid that corner of the living room. I keep telling myself I'll get rid of it, but I haven't done it yet. It's my inheritance, and I don't know if that means I'm stuck with it. I'm scared to touch it again. My body shakes when I think about it. I don't know if it wants me to join it or if it wants something else. I just know that it's there and it's waiting, and I can't look away.